require action. It is Thursday, October 27th. So call to order. No additions or deletions, but I do think since Eric's here now and Janet is you're going to speak to the Great Marsh Park, and Mr. Ennis is here as well. And I think you have some comments about that you'd like to make. We'll go ahead and maybe move that up to the top if that's okay.
Yeah, and with Nancy Stacy online, what you might want to do is, well, that's the next one
Yeah,
anyway.
very next one.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so we'll get into her. So that'll be the only change. I was hoping, I'm not sure if Mary Linda is online, Mary Linda Maddie. I don't see her. But she, hopefully she'll be here attending, and I might have her interject just as a presentation slot that we have. But she had some comments just about the upcoming election and the options to vote early and such, and just wanted to make people clear on what their options were there. And I think there was some confusion amongst us and as Delawareans as terms of what the Supreme Court came out with and whether votes would count and such. So if she comes in, we'll allow her that time. But let's go ahead and Janet, do you want to come up first and just maybe tell us where we are, where we've been, where we are, where we're going to go next, and then we'll go there. Yeah.
Thank you. Janet Reeves, Park and Marina Manager for the City of Lewes. So as I'm sure you're all aware, the city was granted 66 acres from the state of Delaware to operate and manage the Great Marsh Park. Part of that lease condition, it's a 20-year lease, and it was signed in 2006. One of the conditions of that lease agreement is that the city develop and present a Great Marsh Park master plan for review and approval by the state. So there have been, my understanding, prior to my tenure with the city, there have been some iterations of that, but nothing has ever been formalized. The lease agreement is due to expire in 2026. So we had a couple of years left. In January, we did put out a RFP for guidance in development of the master plan, and that was awarded to Pannoni to develop a conceptual master plan. We've held 2 public workshops and had a great deal of input from the public. And then we presented it. We did one presentation to the Parks and Rec Commission in September, and we did the final presentation in October to the Parks and Rec Commission. They agreed, approved with the plan, and have requested that it be moved forward to mayor and council for review. So that's where we are today.
Okay, thank you.
So this considered our review, or is this an introduction of the review? Like, are we going to have I think, is this going to be on a regular meeting agenda and then have a public hearing, or what is the sort of concept moving forward?
So for council to actually act on the plan, it does need to go on a regular meeting agenda. But you would have the option, if you want more time to review it, or if you want a public hearing, you can certainly set that. It's not required to have a public hearing, but that would be your
there will be further review as such. Like, it's, I don't want people thinking this is the review here. Right. Okay. All right. Appreciate that input.
I do have one question. So the lease ends in 2026. Is there, I would suspect there's a renewal option or not?
It comes with a 20-year extension, provided that the terms and conditions are met. And I think that's part of the reason that we wanted to make sure that we get this master plan in place, because that was one of the conditions of the lease. So that is the one thing.
So presumably after 2026, we would continue the lease. Okay, that's one.
So what's expected of, excuse me. So what's expected of us today in terms of this?
Today is for you to listen to Eric's presentation and ask any questions you may have. And then at the November meeting, you would either act on it, schedule a public hearing, or decide what your next step is.
Right. All right, Eric, is this the presentation that you did at the Park and Rec?
Yeah, it's more concise.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
okay.
That's
Good job, Eric. Good.
I'll vote for him.
Come on up, Eric. And Mel, you got to slide. Yeah, good. All right.
Do we need to turn down the lights a little bit? Please, Janet, thank you.
Thank you again for having me this morning. Just a little introduction in case some of you may not know who I am. I'm Eric Wall. I'm a registered landscape architect in the states of Delaware and Maryland. I'm also the current president of the Delaware Native Plant Society. I am a senior landscape architect at Pannoni. The team that was involved with this, bringing this conceptual master plan together, included Janet Reeves, the Parks and Marina Administrator, Barry Duncan, he's with the Great Marsh Park Commissioner, Marty Thompson, she's with the Tree Program of Lewes, and Rodney Robinson, who is the Canal Front Park Commissioner. Next slide. So this is a brief outline of where we started and how we arrived to this point. As you can see, we have a series of events that happened during the course of this process. This will be a more concise presentation of the process, as some of you probably are familiar with what has been shown already at different presentations. Next slide. So Janet talked a little bit about this. The conceptual master plan for the Great Marsh Park provides the City of Lewes with a framework that connects current and future visitors to the rich history of the park and its coastal landscapes of its diverse 66-acre property. The Great Marsh Park includes 66 acres of city leased owned land by the state of Delaware, and the property is to be developed as an active passive park and be operated by the City of Lewes. The conceptual master plan process includes several tasks, including a series of public meetings, ensuring a successful outcome that complies with the state and local guidelines. The intention of the conceptual master plan is to establish a comprehensive plan that identifies desired recreational activities and development of the park as required by the land lease agreement. The conceptual master plan can then be a foundation for future design and planning. I just want to reiterate that this is a master plan of sorts. It's not a construction document. So when this master plan is eventually approved and included as part of the record of the Great Marsh Park, then the next step is to decide priorities of the plan. And then each one of those would have to be further investigated and a construction drawings be done to improve that section of the park, whether it be a trail or additional parking, a rain garden, et cetera. The mission of developing this conceptual master plan is to create a viable, usable, and beneficial park that serves the City of Lewes as well as others that frequent the city's park system, all the while being a model of environmental stewardship. Next slide. So upon review of the site conditions, researching history of the place and analyzing those items, an existing conditions and analysis plan was generated, which is what you see on the screen in front of you. This became the base plan from which ideas and comments were collected from the public in order for an initial concept plan to be created. Next slide. The first public workshop results are shown here with the top 10 recommendations listed. It's clear that preserving nature and minimizing impacts is the clear vision for the park. Any activities should be passive, such as walking trails, educational areas, or observation opportunities for wildlife. Next slide. After the first public workshop, a composite concept plan was generated by combining layers or themes into one plan. This included historical aspect, circulation, education and art, and environmental management. This concept was presented at the second public workshop to obtain comments for the community to ask questions. Next slide. Again, passive activities and nature preservation with minimal impacts were favored for the Great Marsh Park. This is a summary of the public workshop number 2. The first column are the fors and the second column are the againsts. We have also questions that were given that we provided answers to in the report that is available as a link on the agenda. Next slide. Slight revisions and tweaks to the plan resulted from the second workshop, giving us the conceptual master plan that is in front of you right now. Important aspects reflected in the plan are described in the further slides. So let's go to the next slide, please. So circulation, the conceptual master plan proposes additional trails within 4 quadrants of the park, creating a loop that circumvents the entire leased area, roughly 8,100 feet in length. The existing cross-country trail is approximately 2,500 feet. The trails will take visitors through each quadrant where they will experience a series of unique spaces that offer varying ecological conditions. Next slide. So parking. Parking areas are always a sensitive issue because of impervious materials and the quantity of spaces that balance need with open space preservation. An existing parking area is located around the cul-de-sac. Great Marsh Circle is the name of that road. This provides spaces for users of Lewes Unleashed. The conceptual master plan proposes additional spaces made of pervious material along Great Marsh Circle. Stormwater management measures such as rain gardens could be located at the end of the parking area adjacent to the existing swale that includes educational signage on how water flows through the park. In addition, a small parking area is proposed near the Lewes Community Garden that provides a designated area for users of the garden while discouraging parking along Park Road, which is what they do now. This new parking area will be obscured from the road by placing it behind the existing Osage orange hedgerow, which is also a connection to the historical past of the site. A walkway would also connect the parking area to the Lewes Community Garden. And those arrows, go back once. Those arrows that you see on the screen, the top left arrow points to the additional parking by the community garden. And the right bottom arrow points to additional parking along Great Marsh Circle. Okay, next slide. Wetlands. As previously discussed in previous presentations, existing wetlands in the park play a vital role in the overall stormwater management of the site. The existing wetlands have been delineated and are part of the existing conditions plan. The master plan proposes additional measures be taken and be highlighted and viewed as a key feature of the Great Marsh Park. Rain gardens and recreated wetlands can be used in conjunction with existing wetlands. In addition, converting the existing concrete swale or portions thereof to a biofiltration swale should be considered as part of the conceptual master plan. The use of biofiltration swales will help clean stormwater runoff before it enters the Great Marsh. Further study of this drainage area for the concrete swale should occur prior to any decision to remove it or to convert it. These arrows on this page, the top arrow points to recreated wetlands or rain gardens that could connect the biofiltration swales or concrete swales and actually be highlighted as an educational opportunity because it's next to the parking on Great Marsh Circle. The bottom arrow points to one of the 3 existing wetlands on the site. It's a light blue color. It's hard to see on that screen. Next slide. Removal of invasives. The conceptual master plan recommends that these invasives be eradicated and replaced with native species that provide more ecosystem services to the local ecology. The conceptual master plan also proposes to install a meadow in some of these areas where invasive species are removed, in particular along both sides of Park Road. By introducing a meadow to the park, it will provide yet another ecology that benefits specific local wildlife and birds, as well as reflect the historical process of succession that was present within the park's boundaries at one time. So I said some terms in there that I described in my longer presentation, such as succession and ecosystem services. So if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer. The arrows on this screen point to both sides of Park Road, where right now is an edge condition where the sunlight hits mostly on the edges of the woodlands. And since those were most recently disturbed, that's where invasives are thriving because they get most of the sunlight. Invasives include Bradford pear, autumn olive, some honeysuckle, among other things. And the orange hatch you see in a kind of like a wave pattern would be the proposed meadow in this area. And this also helps to promote another experience of users of the park that actually don't get out of their cars, because this road bisects the park and it might be the only way that they experience the park. So when they drive through this meadow, that's their only way to experience the park. So I think that would be a nice feature to have. Next slide. So gathering areas was also another important aspect of the concept plan. The plan proposes varying types of passive gathering areas throughout the park. Some of these spaces propose a structure such as a wildlife observation station, benches, or an overlook to capture a special view. A potential pavilion is proposed centrally in the park with access to the Great Marsh Circle. The pavilion could also be the location of permanent restrooms if deemed appropriate by the City of Lewes. Other types of gathering areas could be council rings or simple benches within an open area along a trail. Gathering areas are important as they provide areas of respite, contemplation, wildlife observation, scenic views, as well as educational opportunities. I also had talked about equity being equal access to all people, and those gathering areas also provide areas for that to take place. Art in the landscape. In recent years, Lewes has become a home to temporary and permanent outdoor art pieces. It is evident that the residents of Lewes take pride in both the aesthetics of the city as well as its cultural significance. Lewes in Bloom and Art in Bloom are helping to make Lewes even more of a destination. The conceptual master plan gives recommendations on locations of potential outdoor artwork. This artwork could be made of natural materials such as those shown on the plan, which is the next slide. We'll get to that. Or they could be sculptures created by local or prominent artisans in the region. Furthermore, the artwork could exemplify or promote the specialized ecosystem in which it resides. The educational, cultural, and aesthetic opportunities are boundless. Next slide. So this is the conceptual master plan that we derived from all the public input. If you have any questions on what things represent, I'll be happy to answer that. I wanted to keep this pretty concise. Just a quick note on what you see on the screen. The red dashed lines are vehicular traffic circulation. The black dashed lines are existing pedestrian trails or bike trails. The solid black lines are potential trails. And if you would take the outermost black line that goes all the way around the perimeter, kind of weaves in and out of the property, that would be the outer loop. And that would be roughly 8,100 linear feet. And then the existing trail around the dog park is shown as a black dashed line. That is the cross-country trail. The purple or magenta circles are points of interest. They could be a gathering area, a wildlife observation area, a bench. The couple things that changed from the original concept was the location of the pavilion, potentially, which originally we had it to the left of the parking circle, the cul-de-sac, in between the cul-de-sac and the dog park. But since then, we have moved it to the right into the woodlands. That would be a little bit more experienced in the ecosystem in which it resides. And it's also a short distance from the cul-de-sac from parking, which would allow for ADA accessibility to the pavilion. Because all hard surfaces in a public setting need to be ADA compliant.
That's this spot.
Yes, that is that topic. The other thing that we added or tweaked is I did not show a potential connection from the new parking along Great Marsh Circle down to the main intersection of Park Road. Right now, there is no sidewalk or anything there, so I added a black, solid black line to represent a potential sidewalk to those connections. And then lastly, how we responded to some concerns about neighbors on the southern edge or the bottom edge of the property. The original concept had some of the trails closer to the neighborhoods. And the one on the left that goes to Harper Point, we had the trail or the connection going through the road. Yeah, that was further down closer to Harper Point, that connection. So we shifted it up to the intersection with Park Road to get it away from the neighborhood. And there's already an existing crosswalk there. So we thought that was best to move it up there. And I think that is it. I hope that was concise enough.
Let me ask you a question. Excuse me. I remember your presentation and one of the things that was so outstanding was the type of sculptures. You can't really see. I wish you had a bigger, because they're unique. I mean, it isn't just like sculptures. The nature sculptures are fantastic. Is there a way you can show that better?
Can we zoom into that potentially, or we can also go on to the link on the agenda to the actual report. And I think they're in the report, they're larger.
Yeah, that would be nice. It's not just, it's made of wood and it's.
Yeah, it's made of vines and twigs and branches.
Right.
I was inspired by what was done at the Delaware Botanical Gardens, because they have some things like that, or they look kind of like birds' nests. But also the ones that I show are from artists from around the world and country, that they're mostly temporary in nature because they are like
Biodegradable.
It's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
But it's something that it combines nature with practicality, and it allows for interest in the park that can change over time, evolve over time, because they could be rotated out and something different put in.
And it makes a big difference in terms of the type of sculptures, and that's why I wanted to,
So
like
there's
that's-
one.
Yeah, that's.
That's almost like an arbor
Mhm.
that's built with twigs and vines that you walk under.
Really, really beautiful.
Yeah,
All right.
and you could scroll on a little bit more. Right there, the bottom picture.
See?
So, and there's some structure that could be potentially in the park council ring I talked about, which is actually a Native American tool or device that was used to represent almost like a democracy, because everybody had equal footing around the circle.
Mhm.
A potential just covered pavilion, to have some coverage from the elements. Start off an educational thing underneath and maybe walk the trails. And then the bottom picture was a potential wildlife observation station. This might be too big for what we're thinking. We could just be a simple bench area, maybe with a covered bench, but something that people can actually sit, rest, and observe nature for a little bit.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Welcome.
Could you go back to the original map that of the actual park? Right here.
Mhm.
This part here, that's currently being farmed, correct?
No, that is
That's
wooded.
one over.
That's
Uh,
what-
The area below,
It's this area.
yeah, but the area below the property.
Oh, okay.
that's over this way.
So the interesting
And this area.
point, the magenta circle that
Okay.
touches that property boundary,
Mhm.
I specifically put that there as an observation or view of the farm. Because I know that I think the city of Lewes owns that property as well.
Right.
That's true.
That's what I was wondering.
And if it's to remain farmed, that's great. And this would be a great observation of what the Great Marsh Park used to be historically, being because all of it was farmed, before. So that would be a nice observation point to see and tie back to historical aspect in a specific point in time. So plus birds and different types of wildlife
Right.
enjoy the farm field meadow rather than the canopy of the trees.
I had a couple questions that maybe Eric and others can help with this about the process. So the state would approve this as as you said, as a master plan. And then separately, then you'd go to have a construction plan or design plan where you're actually proving in the engineering. So would the state then also have to approve that as well? Or do we have to go through this process again with?
Yeah, I think if we are doing things that are consistent with the master plan, they would not need to go to the state on an individual project basis. However, we may submit them to the state.
Because my question is
project
around,
grant money.
some of this calls for some pretty substantial engineering with respect to, there's a stormwater management issue here along that. So that's going to be significant capital potentially.
Mhm.
And then we're talking about parking areas and potentially a restroom area. So those are, permanent structures. So if we renew, we get this, we renew for another 20 years. Do we have to then, if we lose the lease in the future, restore these things back to condition?
I think we'd have to look at what the lease says. Sometimes leases specify,
Well, I would fully expect
That.
that if this lease expires, we're gonna get back to good old real estate law, right? If the lease has an expiration date, it's subject to being renegotiated. And if that isn't in the term, it could be made part of the term. And we could also at that point in time ask for a longer term rather than 20 years. Mr. Khalil likes a 99-year term, I think, and other members of council do. And,
That'd be my
go-
kind of thing.
go for the stars.
Kind of going there. I think the 20 year, if we're gonna, do these things, whether we could renegotiate for a longer term lease,
Sure.
and just have that on for an idea.
right,
The other-
the option in the current lease is for another 20 years. So that, if it's going to be beyond that, that would need to be renegotiated, where the 20-year option is kind of, doesn't require a lot of negotiation.
Right.
So,
I don't think it requires any. I mean, it's, I think
Right.
it's about.
Right.
It's fine, right? Okay. The other is, I appreciate, as you said, it's not all, it's a concept at this point, but how much, like the way that you've shown the sort of stormwater management, because I think Mr. Ennis is here to kind of talk about that piece, is how much of this is sort of very high level concept versus you've had, your Pannoni engineers look at this and say, this is a viable and it's not going to cause any harm to Hornkill or to Harbor View.
But we haven't gone into detail on that nature yet. I mean,
Okay.
this is high level concept right now. We know that the concrete swale works and it takes the water from these areas and to the Great Marsh Park. The trend lately has been to do things as ecologically friendly as possible. So when I saw the concrete swale, I thought, well, that's not what we were trying to do today. Could we potentially convert this to a biofiltration swale, add rain gardens or wetlands, recreated wetlands, along with the other wetlands that are already there, and actually make it a theme of the park on how does stormwater go through this place? How can we improve it? And how can we make it a point of education for people to view? In layman's terms, that they know, we are a coastal town. We know there's climate change affecting us in different ways. How are we trying to improve our local areas as best we can to accommodate those changes? And I think that's where I was coming from as a design element. What goes on next is, if that is something that we really want to do and make a priority, then that's where the research and the engineering takes
Right.
place. And we would actually have to do like a drainage analysis of the area to make sure what we want to do is going to be equal or better than what is happening now. And that does come with a large cost.
Mr. Ennis, do you have any comments? I know that that was a concern of yours. If you want to come up and just add anything to.
Yeah.
Come on up if you want.
Me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And Eric's not gonna go away, right?
No, exactly.
He's gonna
Yeah,
come back,
give him
right?
an
'Cause I have a question for you.
All I have to do is ask for him to remember. I appreciate the opportunity to join the podium. there are some issues that remain unresolved in the minds of several of the neighbors, myself included.
Okay,
I have a handout for you today, which is a result of our conversation on the phone, and I indicate that this folder will probably save you 17,000 unnecessary words. Because I think a picture is supposed to be worth 1,000 words, and there's 17 pictures in your folder. So I hope that you all thank Andrew for that. I have a second handout that I would like to use to show the members of council the flow of the water in the nearby community of Harbor Road. If I may pass that down.
do you have a copy for Eric so he can have,
Do I have a copy for what?
do you have a copy for
I
Eric? by
have 10
chance? Just-
copies today. I apologize.
Okay.
I thought it was a little over the top.
And then-
but I-
should be good.
That's good. We're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
The second handout is more of a discussion document, which indicates to you an unusual water flow that has been going on for 20 years at the end of Harbor View Road. And some members of the council have been here, I think, longer than I and have know of the development of Harbor View. It was not always there, obviously. But Harbor View Road is about a half-mile long, runs from Pilot Town Road to the side of the old University Research Park. As you're receiving the handout that looks a little bit like this with a couple of colored lines on it, what I want to point out to you is that the black box is the end of Harbor View, which contains 50 lots. If you will look at the lower left end, there is a line that says University of Delaware concrete swale. I'm not sure how many of you have seen the concrete swales, but they are there from the, I believe, the early 1980s, when the university began to put the drainage for the fields that they had purchased from the farmers. Those fields contained known vernal ponds that were on a document that's produced by the Delaware Geological Survey. And so there was hydrology problems when the university bought it. They were never successful in getting any businesses to go into the park. But as a result, Harbor View Road was developed. And the most important significant thing in Harbor View Road, there was no street drain at that end of the street. There were street drains included elsewhere, but there was no carryoff. Later in your folder, when you get to the third and final picture, you'll see from the storm Ian that just passed through, leaves began to cover the catch basin in front of my house. And you'll see that the water in the first picture in package C, the water is across the entire road. And that's not unusual, but it illustrates what it was like before they put a catch basin in. Now, after pointing that out to you, I'd like to turn to this map and say that if you were to look at the red line on the right-hand side of the picture, that was a earth berm or earth swale that was put in by BPW in around the early 90s. Then there was a half pipe put in where the blue line begins and the side yard of a young lady named Margaret Ann Lupton. And then the pipe remains in the ground and it goes across to the left. And that process, if going to the left, is heading into the back of my yard. And at the joining point between Mrs. Lupton's house and our house, there is a catch basin in our joint backyard. Then there was the catch basin placed in the front of my mailbox, which is the picture that you'll see. And that catches the street from about a third of the water on Harbor View. That water runs back to the behind our garage and then makes a turn and goes toward the university property where the red line is. That illustrates an open swale in our backyard that fills from time to time when you have a nor'easter, because we are the dead end of a northeast wind pattern. If you come off the bay, you're driving storms right down the street. The problem that was concerning to us as residents was when Eric brought up the statement of removing the concrete swale. There is a concrete swale behind most of the yards between our house and the neighbor's house on 47. And we weren't sure how removal of the swale would have a negative impact. But Board of Public Works created a second fix in the later 90s, and they merged our earthen swale with the university's concrete swale where the red arrow meets the black line.
Mhm.
I think Tim has had the opportunity to see that juncture. It's not a pretty picture.
Yeah.
And the consequence, and Charlie O'Donnell, who's here, I think, can also comment, it may be scientifically correct, but what it does do is if you take the dog park, which is upper left-hand corner here, if you take the dog park's most recent action of draining their flooding water into the concrete swale where the little arrows are, that is going in the opposite direction of our water flow, trying to get out of our earthen swale. So we have two flows of water, one done by BPW, one done by the dog park people. And the overall umbrella of all that is the master plan. And the master plan doesn't fix that. It just says we're going to move the water in the direction of that concrete swale. Now, this is not to wrap up, but I do want to share a couple other comments with you that I'd like to comment on the things I do like about the plan, and that is that the plan has many times mentioned the fact that the ecological environment in this Lewes community could be very special. And there's a gentleman at the University of Delaware by the name of Doug Palamy, who's been advocating the plantings of things to attract pollinators, birds and bees and all kinds of things. I have a page I'd like to hand out as well from the internet of Dr. Talamy's quote. It does two things, I think. It shows you how much water can be produced in a short period of time. A 2-inch rainfall can produce 54,000 gallons per acre of water. The dog park, I believe, is 4 acres or more.
Mhm.
And the third concern that we have is that the current uncontrolled water coming from the dog park, I believe, is interrupting the master plan. This is not all against the dog park because we like the dog park, but the reality is we have a problem with water flow,
Right.
and it doesn't seem to have been corrected in the current version you have before you. It could be done when engineering's done, but at this point, I've been in government for a long time in my life, and I know that sometimes things get put in print, and then things begin to get hardened in people's minds because they've seen it for months, and they say, well, this is the way it should have been because it's been in print. So I'm just here to ask and caution you that the concept of the plan isn't bad, except that the drainage problem that we all suffer from hasn't been addressed. That's the primary thing. Now, let me read from the written part of the storm report. Page 22 of the summary report on number 4 reads, by adding additional rain gardens and recreated wetlands to specific areas within the park, all wetlands can be linked together in a chain that will help move runoff from the roads, dog park, and parking areas into the existing swale. Now, my interpretation of that is from the master plan that's behind you. There is a circle, a very small circle, and it reads connection from, it reads to connect with the hedgerow and the ditch to the swale. And there's 2 black arrows that carry the indication that that water was going to go into the swale that the dog park is already using, and it's flowing the wrong way. So we're deeply apprehensive that there's inconsistencies. Now, something that Eric said relieved a little bit of our concern at the last meeting when he said that all the water would be moved in the direction of the Great Marsh. If that's correct, that would be, I think, a far better solution than moving the water in the direction of Harbor View.
Of course, yes.
Okay. At this stage, I think that the key points that I have, I do want to thank Janet for her continued help in getting connections to the technical people. And at this stage, I think I will be quiet and shut down to 17,000 words.
All right, Dave. I appreciate it.
Excellent.
No, are there any others that have comments on, anyone raised their hand or made comments online, or does Candace, did you have any
No, I'm good. I'm
questions?
good. Thank you.
Q and A is there too.
Okay, should we allow Elizabeth Dennis to talk?
Sure, she wants to say,
Who's this?
she's got her hand up. I think you just unmute her.
Okay.
Oh, she's saying, are you being broadcast on YouTube today? Do we ever get that fire?
Did we
We're
get
all-
that
So
connection?
the box cast for some reason is offline, so we're going to upload it to YouTube. It's not live on YouTube.
Okay,
So I'm gonna have to request a new box,
So direct her to Zoom, back to Zoom.
which she's on Zoom.
Right, but
Yeah.
anyone else who
Yeah.
might be trying to,
okay. Eric, was there anything to close, or Janet, in terms of our next step here?
Well, I'll just respond a little bit to the stormwater.
Yeah.
If you go back to the map, Andy, that's easy. The dark blue bubbles you see hatching are the proposed either recreated wetland or, yes, or the rain gardens.
Yeah.
And my intent was to do a chain, put them in a chain effect, because you're not just moving the water quickly through them, they go into each, for lack of a better word, wetland pond, and they go from one to the next. So the intent of slowing down the stormwater so that it can infiltrate back into the groundwater.
Right.
If it's too much for the ponds to handle, then it goes into these swales to take it out. And yes, I know that the water goes from Great Marsh Circle east, or if on the screen, east to the point where the concrete swale turns at 90 degrees. Yes. So you have water coming from both directions there. And then the intent was the concrete swale takes it up and out towards the Great Marsh Park. Now, and I'm just, estimating this, if when we move forward and this becomes an issue that you want to pursue, we might find out that the alternative way to solve the stormwater issue is to take it straight up from the cul-de-sac out.
to go from here
Yeah,
up.
yeah, because there's a natural gap opening there
Yeah,
that people can walk through, but that might be a better way to get some of the stormwater from around that central area out to the Great Marsh Park. I just don't know that right now because we haven't analyzed it for drainage purposes. So that's what's on the engineering phase of this
Right.
thing.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
before you go away, may I ask a question? Is that okay?
Yeah,
Yes. Eric, the circles represent lookouts, is that what you call them?
Well,
Or gathering areas?
gathering areas or wildlife observation
Okay.
places. The larger circle
Like
right
this.
there and the one that's up towards the community garden, yes.
Uh-huh.
Those would be more of an overlook of the Great Marsh.
So
because
they would be
those-
elevated, is that correct?
They could not be elevated high.
No, I
But
understand.
yeah, but they could potentially, and again, we would have to do some sort of engineering to determine what the best viewscape would be.
Okay,
At what height,
right,
but yeah, that would be a more of a wild or observation point lookout. Where the other smaller circles are just gathering areas.
just gathering areas. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So if there's no one from the audience that has any questions, I think we'll move on.
got-
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, come on up. Just please identify yourself and give your
Address.
address.
Yeah, hi, my name is George Terrell. I actually have a mailing address in Milton, but I've more or less lived in Lewis for the last 30 some odd years. My in-laws were very instrumental, Mr. Ennison, in actually preserving a lot of that property in the past. And we sort of kind of jealously guard that property in a sense that, we have a familial connection to it. And we've heard plenty of stuff with the swales and it's been addressed very well and I appreciate it. One of the other things that I was a little concerned with is the area directly behind their house off of Harbor View is a utility corridor. And, and having talked to some of the people with as far as removing stormwater and dealing with things like that, there's two ways of doing it. Bioswales are great, they're natural, they're pretty looking things and they put the water back where it needs to, but it's not necessarily the most efficient way of getting water out of an area when it's a problem. So removal of that part of the concrete swale, I don't know is necessarily the best idea. But along with that is it adds a certain level of support along there because they have power utility poles there, which are right up against that swale.
Sure.
And I would think that it acts somewhat as an embankment or a structural support for that, plus the heavy trucks that go in there as a general work order, as far as getting removal of branches and whatever they have to do with the poles.
Right.
And also too, we're always concerned with like the vernal ponds. There's no natural inlet or outlet. They're basically puddles that form and are very important for a lot of species that don't exist, in other types of wetlands, like it doesn't necessarily have to be water there, even for years at a time. There are certain species that can hatch, 10 years later. And so we want to make sure that they stay relatively separate from any of the other water issues as far as moving water out of the area. And the other thing I'm always concerned with is the use of herbicides and pesticides. Even as a circle at the end of Harbor View, I try to actually cut it and keep anybody from going there and spraying like Roundup or any of the glyphosate type materials there around there, because that water does run directly into the storm drain and then eventually goes into the swale, which eventually then gets into the park. And I know it's used along the corridor there, which I'm not crazy about that. And, it's bad for the environment. Talamay was mentioned and, his, one of the big things is preserving insects. We don't, without them, we don't have anything. I mean, they are the basis for, pollination and other things like that. Those are really my only really big concerns is, that those are addressed is try to keep areas natural as possible, try not to disturb it. I actually brought it up at one of the other meetings. There's an interesting thing that occurs along that corridor is a firefly hatching that, and mating that goes on that looks like something you'd go down to the Smoky Mountains to watch in some of those areas where it is actually a vacation type thing. So I'd like to have those areas like closely guarded, protected, and undisturbed as possible. So those are really my only really big concerns as far as that is.
Have you identified
what we've talked,
George, have you identified those particular areas like the fireflies, for example, and the drag?
Well, we talked about it, and we've walked around in there. We've actually walked the area a number of times actually and talked to a few people about it. And, it sounds silly like all fireflies, but I mean, they are being studied. They're up and down the coast and there's a lot of different varieties of them. And they don't do well in disturbed areas. It's just the way they are. And as weird as it sounds, we've also talked about like ecotourism. I mean, people do go to various parts of the country to watch fireflies, and this was a display like you had to have seen it to believe it. It was really quite amazing. And again, and along with that, you don't want lighting in certain areas, even though there's power and utility poles there. We don't really want the area lit up. And I'm assuming the park's going to be closed after sunset and this and that. Yeah, well, however that works. I mean, you can't keep people from driving through, obviously, but you don't necessarily want, lighted areas where people are going to be walking around in the middle of the night either. So, but those are my big, big things. And I know it's conceptual, it's in the early processes of these being done. And again, it'd be nice at some point too, to add a little bit more input in certain types of things that may or may not be done, in the future as far as how these are going to be put together. So. All right. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, George.
I have one more question for Eric.
Yeah, go ahead.
Eric, I have one more question for you. During your study of the park of that 66 acre area, did you identify any opportunities for interconnectivity, pedestrian interconnectivity to any of the surrounding established neighborhoods, streets? And are there any such opportunities for us?
Well, for the communities down below, Canary
This is
Creek
foregone.
and Harbor
Yeah.
Point.
Right.
The only connection we really have is there's sidewalks at the intersections that go down.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our trail system would connect to the intersection and then they could take the sidewalk into the community.
Correct.
We did have it lower on the street on the Harbor Point one, but we got some pushback for that because it was kind of felt too close to the
Right.
Harbor Point, as well as that road is privately maintained by their HOA. So that's why we pushed it up. I did have on my analysis page, the most potential users of the park within walking distance are, Harbor Point, Harbor View, Canary Creek, and Pilot Town Village. So there's already a multi-use trail that parallels Park Road that Pilot Town Village people can cross the road at the appropriate connections and then take that through. I did not provide anything to Harbor View. There is, like I mentioned before about stormwater, there's an actual gap that kind of goes up north from the cul-de-sac that could potentially be a trail connection, I guess. But that wasn't the intent at this point. We wanted this circular loop that kind of takes it from existing trails and multi-use paths all the way around inside the park.
Right.
And doing it the safest way possible.
Right.
That's why we're also using intersections as much as we can too.
And I appreciate what you've just described. But that will be something we could look at more closely in the future,
Yes.
correct?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Dave and to George for your input and for everyone who's involved in the process here. Before we move on, we're going to that was for people who may be joining late. We took E2 early so that Eric can get back to his regular work schedule if he needs to get back to drawing. Yeah. And before we get on to D1, then I had asked Mary Linda Maddie to come in. There was, with the election coming up, I think there, amongst some of the residents, I think wanted just some clarification around what some, early voting, your early voting options were, absentee ballots, et cetera. I think based on some of the news coming out, I think I wanted to just give her under C, we allow for presentation. So we consider this a public service announcement. Just help us out on what you've learned from the Department of Elections and the Attorney General's office there.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
So the Delaware Supreme Court on October 7th struck down vote by mail and same-day voter registration legislation. And so the court's decision comes a month ahead of November 8th, which is the election. And at the same time, the Department of Elections had planned to send out mail ballots to those who requested them on October 10th. So instead, what the Department of Elections did is they sent a letter to everyone who had requested a mail-in ballot and giving them three options. One is to vote in person at their polling place. The second is to vote early, which starts today. And I have which I can email to you, a list of the early voting dates. And the location is the fire hall on Janus Road. And then the third one would be to request an absentee ballot. And so what the confusion was that the Department of Elections started to mail out the absentee ballots on September 27th. And people were confused about what the difference between mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. And I spoke to Frank Brugeau, the Deputy Attorney General, and he said that the applications for a mail-in ballot and an absentee ballot look the same online. The only difference is at the bottom of the absentee ballot, there's an area where you can indicate why you're requesting it. So in person, if you request an absentee ballot, that it must be received by 12 p.m. on the day before Election Day. By mail, request deadline has to be received 4 days before Election Day. And online, again, 4 days before Election Day.
And the absentee is the day before,
Pardon me?
the absentee?
No, the day, if it's in person, it has to be received, the request, by 12 p.m. on the day before Election Day, correct?
Okay.
By mail is received 4 days before Election Day and online 4 days before Election Day. And voted ballots are due received back by 8 p.m. on Election Day.
You have a copy of that for us?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I will email it to you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I'm gonna send out an email blast to our
She
residents
could
that,
include those bullet points, because I
Yeah.
think the ironic thing was she did a lot of digging to get this information. It wasn't easily sort of available, so.
What happened is I had spoken to voters who said, wait a minute, I mailed in a ballot. And when I called them back to find out, did you mail in a ballot or did you mail in an absentee ballot? And then they clarified it, and it was an absentee ballot. So it's terminology,
Right.
whether it's mail in or absentee. So,
Good, thanks.
I
okay.
really appreciate Mary Linda.
So
Yeah,
I'll get
really.
this. Do you want me to send it to Anne Marie? I'll email
if you
it.
don't mind that.
If you have an electronic copy, that'd
Yeah,
be
yeah,
great.
well.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Okay. So going back to our unfinished business, D1. So is Nancy, you're up. I see you. Are you ready to just kind of give us an overview here?
Yes, I am.
All right, I appreciate. Take us through.
Okay, so what I'm presenting today, and I'll do it very briefly, is an ordinance to amend the zoning districts and the annexation res and annexation zones AX res and AX mix. Now, you may wonder why we're doing this. Mayor and City Council will recall that fairly recently LPC came to you to discuss what should be priorities for us to address this year and in 2023. Well, we did the same back in 2021 and 2022, and at that point, a review of this section of the code regarding annexation was set as a priority. So we created a subcommittee. It was chaired by Melanie Moser, who unfortunately can't be here because she's on vacation. So I'll try to do my best to represent Melanie and the subcommittee as well as the whole LPC. So she chaired it. Members of it included myself, Bob Heffernan, and also Joe played a major role in this, and of course Janelle. So go to the next slide. What I would like to be clear on first before we look at what we focused on is this only covers annexation areas that are being annexed and developed. So it has nothing to do if the city is looking at annexation and annexing a community that's already built. And so the focus is only on those new areas coming in and being developed as they come in. So our objective was to encourage development in annexing areas of sociable, pedestrian-oriented neighborhoods patterned on the overall design and look and feel of the city of Lewes, while at the same time trying to ensure compatibility with neighboring areas and providing some design flexibility. So we really relied heavily on concepts of traditional neighborhood design. And we are doing this to ensure that as we looked at design guidelines and rules for these areas, that they would be maintaining the character and the feel of the city of Lewes. Go on to the next slide. So I'm going to go fairly quickly, and this is just again, we relied heavily on traditional neighborhood design. Go to the next slide. So in the purpose statement, I'm now going to go through the change, trying to summarize the changes in the code, but you have the full draft there, and you can easily see the areas that are crossed out and the areas that have been added. So we added several things to the purpose statement, and this included having the areas designed to be pedestrian oriented, to provide a sense of place, design flexibility, interconnection with neighboring areas, and respecting the neighbors that abut to the area that might be being annexed. Next slide. Now, if you recall, this section of the code provides for covers residential areas that are being developed and also mixed areas, meaning a mix of residential and commercial. So and it also provides for cluster development. And this was a way of providing a way to develop these areas in a manner which provided the ability for the developer to choose to opt into a cluster option, which would have the buildings and residences being clustered while increasing the amount of open space. So in terms of cluster development, we made several changes to the design layout and recommended features. And you can see these here. First, in terms of design and layout, if the area includes over 50 units, it should include 2 types of housing. So by type of housing, we would mean it could be a single family home, some single family homes, and some duplexes, for example. If it's over 100 units, having 3 types of housing. Then recommended features are porches, use of variable materials, variable front setbacks, reduced visibility of parking, having the parking come either off of an alley or setback from the facade. And keep in mind, when we revised 170, we made some of these changes in that code too. And also organically shaped stormwater management pools or areas, as opposed to square or rectangular ones. Next slide. Other things that were modified in this is an emphasis on ensuring that there's a transition to neighboring areas, both in terms of types of buildings, density, and the scale, so that we're not going to, if we had an aerial view of Lewes, we wouldn't look at something that went like this and then suddenly like that, and spread out, really dense, etc. Also, that the house facades should orient towards existing streets. And 10% of the open space to be located centrally. The idea here is to provide an area for communities to congregate, to intermix, and use the open space. We also have deleted corridor buffers on Savannah and Pilot Town roads. If you drive through Lewes, these are typically roads that would have houses facing them, as opposed to something like driving in. As you drive along New Road, you see many corridor buffers as you drive in. Next slide. In the dimensional regulations, the requirement for open space was increased from 10% up to 20%. And if you're going for one of the cluster options, it remained at the higher numbers that had been there before. This 20% is also consistent with the changes we made to 170. Next slide. As we look at our community aging, and we see many trends in terms of smaller houses and more compact living that people are moving towards, we reduced the required width for townhouses from 25 feet to 20 feet. And keep in mind, 20 feet is still a quite reasonable width of it for a townhouse. Next slide. Similarly, we reduced the required square footage for minimum lots from 8,000 to 6,000 in cluster option 1, and in cluster option 2 from 6,000 to 5,000. Now, keep in mind, in each of these options, while lot size is being reduced, the amount of required open space is being increased. Next slide. And then as we reduce the widths for townhouses, we similarly reduce the required square footage from 2,000 square feet to 18,000 square feet, to 1,800 square feet. And as someone who raised a family of 4 for a long time in 1,200 square feet, it certainly is possible to manage in 1,800. We'll move on to the next slide. For setbacks, the front yard setback can range now from 15 to 25 feet, and there was no change in the side or rear yard setbacks. Next slide. We deleted floodplain zones with increased height allowance, And keep in mind, if you're doing the clustering options, the floodplain areas are excluded from those. So next slide. And then in terms of maximum lot coverage, increased the lot coverage for a townhouse to 65% from 60%. Next slide. In terms of respecting neighbors, we included items that really focus on providing a transition to neighboring housing in terms of type, density, and scale along the property line. So that, you know, if you saw an aerial view, you wouldn't be able to really know where the new development began, because it would, you know, fit in and mix in with the existing development around it. Next slide. And so in terms of Lewes traditional neighborhood features, we are focusing on having a pedestrian scale, trying to encourage sociability, a variety of homes, a streetscape of interest, interconnectedness, discrete garaging of vehicles, and flexible central community space with respect for neighbors. And we think these are all things that reflect our community in the town of Lewes right now. Next slide. So this is just an overhead view of what a community built to some of these standards might look like. Next slide.
We don't have any more.
That's it.
That's it. So that's a quick overview. Included in the attached materials to this agenda is the actual draft ordinance, and then the table, dimensional regulation table for the annex zones. Are there any questions or discussion?
And for this one, we need to get this on a regular agenda and then set a public.
Yeah,
hearing from there.
so I would say that any questions today would be from members of council, and if there are additional questions or comments, that they would be available for the public hearing. Today is really to answer any questions that you all may have before we set the public hearing.
So this is following what we hope, what we would normally follow from the LPC, where, you know, this is one where mayor and city council told us this was something that they were interested in having us address. We had a subcommittee. We spent time, you know, working on this. It came back to LPC. We held a public hearing, made some final revisions, are now presenting it to mayor and city council for questions. It would then go to your meeting to set a date for a hearing, a public hearing, and then you would typically vote on it.
And was this a unanimous vote coming out of LPC, Nancy? The vote to recommend?
Because we had, Janelle can help me with my memory here. Because we did have one new member, I think we had one abstention.
Okay, but no objection.
But otherwise unanimous, yes. Mhm.
All right, anyone from the table? Because again, we'll have, I think some of us have filed this, and I think we'll have a chance to chew on it more. Okay. Nancy, I appreciate you presenting this to us today.
Thank you.
All right. Let's keep moving then. And the next topic is D2, presentation discussion regarding amendments to the full year 2023 budget. So Ellen Lorraine, you want to take it away for us?
So today I'm hoping to see council discussion and questions regarding a proposed budget amendment to fiscal year 2023. What you have before you is a summary of the proposed changes. That's a two-sided document. The recommendation is to propose amendments to 5 different funds, and I can certainly walk you through those changes if the summary doesn't provide enough information. Most of these we had discussed at our September workshop. And then, as we mentioned at the October council meeting, more information became available that we did not feel comfortable putting forward to council a recommendation to amend it. And we therefore wanted to have more conversation at this workshop. So the majority of the changes are going to be in the 1 1/2% transfer tax fund. But we can walk through that. The general fund, we're just moving out the Sussex County grant money that the city received and moving it to the 1 1/2 transfer tax fund where it will be spent on capital projects. Municipal street aid changes are to adjust expenditures to what we anticipate coming in, as well as removing a project that I think council decided to at least defer to the future, which would be the beach lighting project. A portion of that project is being paid from municipal street aid funds, with a balance being paid from the 1 1/2% transfer tax fund, which you will see on the second page. Changes in the general capital projects fund, again, are to adjust expenditures to what we expect them to come in by the end of the fiscal year. On the second page is the bulk of the changes, and this detail can be found in page 26 of the larger document. And if we can go back a little bit in time at our September workshop, we looked at projects that, we had seen expenditures for and maybe hadn't budgeted when we approved the FY23 budget, as well as projects that were coming in higher than what we had previously budgeted. So after that conversation, we looked at a couple different scenarios, as well as plugging in the additional information that we had mentioned became available at the October workshop or October council meeting, which was to say that the city received funding from the state, from the bond bill, to make improvements to Canal Front Park. The cost of those improvements was anticipated to equal the amount of grant money that the city received. I think those costs are going to come in higher. So we were accounting for an additional $250,000 in cost for that particular project, in addition to $60,000 cost to administer that project. So if you're looking on page 26 of the larger document, and this is how I base the proposed budget amendment, is number 2, which is using what we spoke about previously, including projects that had not been previously budgeted for, and including phase 26 project. That project will be, some of the costs will be paid from municipal street aid, $100,000. The city received funding of $40,000 that will be used to offset the cost for this particular project. And that has been reflected in the change. And then it is including the $250,000 plus the $60,000, which is in the red line. So the recommendation is to have moving forward with phase 26 project, as well as the capital improvement line items in green. What this means is the drawdown on prior year reserves will be estimated at $690,000. As opposed to the adopted FY23 budget of 1.482 million. And the reduction, the less drawdown on reserves is because we are anticipating less transfer tax money to be received in FY23. So we've adjusted transfer tax revenue down to take into consideration the less money the city will be receiving. And because of the less funding the city will be receiving, we needed to look at capital expenditures. And so that is the proposed changes to the budget that we are recommending. Are there questions regarding the transfer tax fund?
No. Are there more projects that we could put on the shelf to get to draw down that reserve number?
So we, as I mentioned provided or budgeting for funding for phase 26 from other funds. I think that that is a project that we are seeing some deterioration in the streets as well as the sidewalks. The remaining items are for projects that we are trying to finish up on, such as the playground
Mhm.
and well as the tennis courts. And the other items would be capital projects that we have received either county money for that we need to complete or state money for that we need to complete.
The one you mentioned is the tennis course, and that's just a matter of we're holding that invoice until we're satisfied with the
Correct.
quality.
That's
What if,
correct.
what if that doesn't happen until next year? Like,
That would just be money that would get reallocated in FY
the
24.
next year, yeah?
Yes.
We'd have to hold it.
Are we at any movement on that, by the way? Have they gone to site visit?
So there's a site visit scheduled for 1 o'clock this afternoon.
Okay,
With the contractor?
Mhm.
all right. So the message is we don't have much room to,
Yeah, we really have worked on this in terms of recognizing there are some things we cannot, it would be worse if we would have put them off. So it's pretty tight.
so we need an action on this next meeting though, right? We can't take, it's not on here to take
Right,
action
right,
today,
right.
so.
Correct.
This is questions,
Yes.
possible
Yeah.
questions you have.
So all the, basically, as you've said, line 26 is where we're showing what we've the projects that we're not going to go for and the ones we'll go. And basically what you've done on the first sheet, what you've described to us is you're taking that 500 out of line 6 from the budget and plugged it in to the revenue that for the capital.
Correct.
projects.
So that's going to be on page 26 and you'll see that additional funding of in line 460, 487. That's an increase of $1 million. That's to show a budget for the 500,000 received from the county and the 500,000 received from the bond bill.
In your summary sheet there.
But it's not on page, is that on page 26?
Page 26, line for account 460, 487.
Hold on a second, 480.
Other
those-
revenues at the top.
For those following along, essentially what Ellen Lorraine's done here, this is sort of a cheat sheet for, because these attachments are online for the public.
I'm sorry.
And so you can use this cheat sheet on the left-hand column. The far side will tell you which line and which item is the code in the sort of the second to left column there. So you can line it up with which budget item is being drawn from.
Yes.
Mhm.
So it gives the page number in the approved budget, the account, what the approved budget was, what the proposed amendment would do, increase or decrease,
Mhm.
and then what the proposed amended budget would look like.
Exactly. I have no problems.
And the,
No questions here?
I have no problems
All
with this
right.
at all.
Yeah, this has been scrubbed
Yeah,
very extensively and
yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to just ask specific to the budget, the projects that are identified in green in the lower section of page 26.
Yeah.
The numbers that we have here, those are based upon the benefit of competitive bidding. Is that correct?
These are all estimates at this point. None of these projects have been bid yet.
None of them have been bid.
No.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks for that work, Ellen Lorraine. So the next update we have is from Councilperson Vasella. She has been doing a parking study and she's prepared to give us just an update here.
thank
Take
you,
it away.
Mayor.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to give you a brief backstory, on July 28th, Mayor and Council workshop, I volunteered to conduct a parking study. Comes under the category in life of be careful what you volunteer to do. But it is going along well. And the purpose of today's discussion is for me to give you a brief update on where the parking study is and where it is going to go. So the city does not have an inventory of residential properties that do not have off-street parking. And so we decided that it was useful to have an inventory of those homes within a certain area that don't have off-street parking, those that do, and then make some assessments along with the prior studies that have been done by an august group of citizens to kind of put together some recommendations and provide mayor and council with a bit more information so that we can make some decisions along the way. We'll go to the next chart. So I provided previous workshop with a roadmap of where I will be headed. And as you can see, it shows you the calendar and the arrow pointing. The red arrow pointing up is where we are today. And so to date, what has happened is in August, I met with members of city staff and the engineering firm GMB to identify what resources are already available, things that I didn't need to go collect for the purposes of this study. And in that time frame, I've been assembling the inventory of readily available information and assessing the gaps in that information. I've collected information from city sources, and so I have quite a file so far. Some more of that information will be collected. And then in that time frame, I defined the scope of the study that I will be conducting. And then in October, I began my walkabouts in the city. And here in the room, I have the little cart that I've been using, along with a sign and a very bright green vest that was provided to me by the streets department to ensure my safety. I wasn't sure if it was merely safety or being a big target, but as you can see from the sign on the cart, I did not want to be mistaken for the Sussex County tax assessor. So the sign makes it very clear that this woman they may not know walking around their streets is there to conduct a parking study. And I've had lovely conversations with citizens who have provided me with their thoughts about parking and many, many other matters. And so it's just been a bountiful opportunity for me to visit with citizens. So next chart, please. So the progress so far, the geographic boundaries of the study have been defined. We'll show those in just a moment. An inventory of the city resources has been completed, and I have completed 50% of the walkabouts. So you might ask, or you might wonder, how is that going? So it's been about 60 hours of time between the preparation to walk and the walking. I've defined the scope of the geographic boundaries of the study. We'll show those in just a moment. While interviewing the city employees, I've assembled the information, identified the gaps, et cetera. And within that 50% completion, there were roughly 20 streets and something in the neighborhood of 325 homes inventoried. And I expect that the walkabout portion of this study to be completed in the month of November. And the next slide, please. So there are a number of portions of this study, and I'd like to give you the benefit of understanding how these areas were chosen. So in the areas south of the canal, this is the area that is going to be covered within this parking study, and there's a rationale to it. We put a pin in the corner of 2nd and Market Street, and then did a 1 mile radius from that point to estimate where the parking issues are in the city. And as with many big projects, you can't do it all at once, so you break it up into smaller parts. And so you'll see these 4 quadrants, and the next chart, please. One quadrant is identified as the mercantile area for obvious reasons, where most of the shops and restaurants are located. Next chart, please. This area is identified as the City Hall area. Next chart, please. Next one identified as the library area, where it has the largest population there, and some things are affected by what go on in Stango Park and the library. And last but not least, this third one, the George H.P. Smith Park area. So these areas were bounded as the areas chosen on the areas south of the canal for reasons that may be obvious to some, but I'll share some highlights for them. So for example, where you have the George H.P. Smith Park area, that of course is where the farmers market often has its sales. There are other community activities that take place in George H.P. Smith Park. And so on occasion, parking becomes an issue. So that area, amongst others, was chosen to be defined. And if we'll go to the next chart, we of course have the beach area, which is north of the canal. And because the map wouldn't fit all on one chart, we have the beach area east, and the next chart, we have the beach area west. Nobody's been left out on that. So let's go to the next chart. So the inventory of city resources include parking enforcement databases. Thank you, Dennis, for that. City street contracts, information shared by GMB for the contracts that it has worked on, as well as the beach parking study that was conducted earlier. And then thanks to Janelle, GIS mapping resources. And so those of you who love maps like I do know that those are essential to this project. Next chart. The parking inventory elements includes homes with off-street parking, homes without off-street parking, possible street parking spaces. And with that, it means actually taking measurements of streets where those streets are not currently striped to ascertain how many legitimate street parking spaces might be possible on those streets. And so the length of a parallel parking space in the city of Lewes is 22 feet. There may be occasions where that folks can park in an area where they don't actually have 22 feet, but in the measurements and calculations that I'm collecting, I'm trying to ascertain how many spaces, if streets were lined, would be possible on those streets. And last but not least, the existing parking lot spaces. And I must say that our parking enforcement officer was very, very helpful in providing me with data that he has in amazing quantity and depth of detail. So that information will be analyzed as well. Next chart, please. So the next steps, I will complete my walkabout survey. So if you see me walking around town with my little cart and my green vest, please come out and say hello. The drone footage was completed by GMB, and in November, it will be analyzed. So we're hopeful that by the end of November, the drone footage that was conducted over these portions of the city south of the canal will then be looked at, and the information captured from the data of the drone footage. The analysis of the parking data, once all of that is completed, the goal is to complete that in the month of December. There will be public outreach by me in January and February. The past parking study committee members will be a wealth of knowledge, as well as their reports that have already been made public. Interviews with businesses and nonprofits, because they're so critical as cornerstone elements to a vital community of Lewes. The analysis of the data and public input will be worked on in March, draft report in April, and then as committed, my goal is to present to mayor and council by May 1st, a report. I'm looking at this holistically, so it's not just about the numbers. All of you know what a vital community Lewes is. You fully understand the dependence and the enjoyment we have with visitors that come to our city, the impact of tourism on the city's budget, and the fact that we are a coastal town that is appreciated by many is not lost on any of you. So it's not just about the numbers. It's also about what the impact of parking or lack thereof might do to many of these factors that have a bigger role to play in what the city of Lewes is to all of us. So I thank you. And that is a summary of my status report to date, Mr. Mayor.
Great. I appreciate that, Candace. And, you know, if people want to make some comments that they can, but I think the point here that Candace has already made is she just was giving an update, as you saw in her timeline at the end. So there will be ample opportunity to continue to give, you know, input or share anecdotes as needed in certain situations. But I appreciate this is going to provide, you know, some directional data that'll help us in a variety of ways, I think, as a city.
Yeah, I certainly want to comment and compliment our colleague here. I mean, this is a major undertaking that's very labor intensive. And I look forward to walking the streets with Candace when she taps me, and I'm sure she's going to be reaching out to a lot of people. But this is a really important work, and I just simply want to compliment Candace.
So do I.
Terrific.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say the same, Candace. I realize what this takes, and we can tell you how much we appreciate you taking this project on. And I certainly look forward to the end product. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
All right, so there are any comments? We're gonna move on here. So the next item is actually an item that we should take action on today, as noted. So we recently passed a rental ordinance, which covered both short and long-term rentals. The thing that we did not take action on was the fee structure. I think it's both fees and violations that we're looking at here today.
Yeah.
So one of the things that was provided to us as council was a calculus that went behind that. So I'll just go ahead and read that off so folks are aware of what went into that. I think this was discussed in the committee also. But the original license fee was $83, and that was established in 2017. So they put a present day calculus to bring that up to about $96. What has also been included in the new license fee is host compliance contract. So that's something that we're using, one, to identify violators. They do also provide some best practice emails, things like that, and we've also sourced our consultant from there. So that would help to offset that cost. Brochure and document costs in the form of maps and forms, inspection of rental units, and that's broken out by staff time for processing applications and follow-up. So again, the host compliant contracts around $16K, and then the staff time was estimated around $60. So it came to around $196.
Right.
So I think that's where the 200 came from.
Yes, it's also important to know that in the ad hoc committee, they voted on this number and came up with this figure as a group.
But I would just say, I think it's good that you're almost at the 200, and that explains why, the fee itself. But I think the other is like trash and just general, and I've expressed this and that I'd prefer, I'm not gonna, die on the sword here, but a bifurcated that recognizes that, we want to maybe in some ways encourage long-term to make their fee less than you would be for a short-term rental, with the other argument being that, my garbage, I only really need to put out every other week. The short-term rental, you're putting out the garbage, they could probably use 3 or 4 pickups a week. But they get 2 and they're using the max there. And so that's my justification for that. And that's why I think I put it out there, anyway, one slightly higher than the other, 300 for one, 200 for the other, or 300 for one, 150 for the other, something. But, I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'll just hold fast with what we had, given that it was a consensus of the ad hoc committee. I'm gonna just flow with that one. I understand your concerns, though.
Okay. How about the other feedback that we heard, that some of the fee, and this is, to be fair, mostly from the real estate community, but that the violations were to how everyone's comfortable with those?
Yeah, they're good with
We
it.
had extensive discussions.
Yeah, we did.
On that.
Okay. Any other questions then? We can, Tim, any comments?
No, the only comment I will make is that I actually, my thinking concurs with yours with respect to, I would like to see greater distinction between short-term rental fees and long-term rental fees.
Okay.
I think it's important that everyone remember that this is new, and we are going to be gathering quite a bit of information in next year. So you can go back and revisit
Yeah,
these
I
things
respect
again.
that. Yep. So do we want to call, someone want to make a motion then to accept it as is, or accept with?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the fee structure as is.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I abstain.
Okay, so that passes 4 yeses and 1 abstention. Okay, so we have, I think everything then need to kind of move the short-term and long-term rental process forward then.
Yeah. Mhm.
Alrighty, so I think the next thing to finish off our new
Have an extra one.
Yeah.
our new, our unfinished business, I should say, is presentation discussion of an MOU with Department of Elections and an ordinance to amend Chapter 3 elections to adopt the state voter roll and registration lists for municipal elections. So I'll bring up the speed as far as I know, and then Anne and Glenn can take it the rest of the way. But we did make a prior to this council, even I think Tim and I were part of this, we did vote to have a charter change to allow us to rely on the state's voter roll. And the idea there was that would just make a process administratively easier. But I think what we have here is in order to do that, we have to have some kind of contract or an MOU in place to petition the state. So if you want to take us through that, Glenn, maybe, or?
Do you want to talk about the MOU, Anne Marie, or would you like me to?
Well, so I'll talk a little bit about the MOU and where we are with things now, because I have been in touch with the State Department of Elections. And the MOU that's in the packet is, similar to the MOUs that they have with other municipalities that are using the state voter rolls. This does require coordination between the city and the Department of Elections to make sure that they have our current municipal boundary, which we've already been, they have been actually working on that. And they've been doing some GIS work in the background there. They seem to be ready to move forward. So there will be probably iterations of quality control to make sure that there are not inadvertently voters that are not in the city on the registration or vice versa. But that's not really significantly different than when somebody comes in and registers to vote, we have to confirm that they're in the city. We are engaged. I'm sure they will be busy for the next 2 to 3 weeks. So if council is amenable to continuing to move forward with this, we would put both the agreement and the ordinance on the November agenda. And then that would be after the election where we kind of pick up things with them. Glenn and I have gone back and forth on the ordinance. I did put the copy on your desk this morning. Glenn made sure that the wording is such that we're using the state's voter registration, but that he used the same language from the charter about being a.
Bona fide domicile. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. The ordinance is actually one of the easier parts of the process here. Getting the charter change was a big piece of this, and the charter was done well. We looked at it as we went through this ordinance process to make sure that that nothing else needed to be changed in the charter, that every change that needed to be made was made. So I think we're in good shape there. This ordinance is really a bit of housekeeping, just to clarify within our code that it is the state voter registration system that you'll be using as the registered voter list.
And I know I don't know if anyone from BPW is on there. I know another frustration that townsfolk have is that you have to register for the city election and BPW election. I don't know if you can speak to whether BPW might have this in their option in the future to simplify things on their side or not. I don't, if you don't feel comfortable, then.
I haven't reviewed their charter. I don't know that they have the ability to use the state voter registration system. Have you spoken?
I think it would be more challenging for them because in our case, you have to live here to vote here. If they were to use the city's or the state's voter registration system, they would have to have a dual registration system because for them, any property owner or customer can vote. So that includes commercial property owners. So there.
Many of those are out of state too.
Yes.
Right.
You're going to still have to require to register to vote separately.
Right, but this brings them down to 2 voter registrations rather than 3.
Right.
So
We're going in the right direction.
yeah.
Amen.
Okay. All right. So this will be then on our next agenda for
Yes.
public meeting.
In November?
Actually vote to
Yes.
go forward with this.
Okay,
All right.
thank
Well,
you.
I appreciate that. And are there any questions from that were online that came across or anything? If there are questions that we missed from previous agenda, you can go ahead and read those out too now.
So there are two questions on there that kind of go back to Candace's item, but they're both seemingly more related to the beach parking, which I'm going to
Oh,
give an update
Yeah.
on where we are with beach parking as part of E3.
Oh,
So we can probably hold them for that.
okay.
All right, sounds good. All right, so we are now on to new business.
Mhm.
Jen, I don't know if you want to come up and introduce this one? This has to do with, now we had seen this as a council prior to the summer season,
Oh,
or
right.
maybe in the beginning of the summer season, and kind of agreed to table it and just
Mhm.
kind of go with the status quo. But the intention here is to look at the recreation policy and then maybe establish some fees around it. So go ahead, Janet, take us through that.
So back in 2018, sorry, Janet Reeves, Parks and Marina Manager. Back in 2018, Mayor and Council did adopt a recreational activities policy, though it was temporary. And it, to my knowledge, never came back to council. And when I came on the position, as I was reviewing documents, I felt since we were still allowing the recreational activities permitted, that the policy needed to be updated. So I took it to the Parks and Rec Commission in January or February of this year, and the draft was first reported, presented to council in April 11th at your regular meeting. And council members had some questions and comments and asked that the Parks and Rec Commission consider those. And the major issue was the fee structure, because the Parks and Rec Commission did make recommendations on significant increases to these permits. And one of the other issues was there was a section of the policy that stood silent on what is permitted, and that time period was October to January. So they addressed that. So what we have today is the revision to that policy based on comments. It went back to a work group from the Parks and Rec Commission. And I'm happy to go over the most recent changes from those meetings. So on page 1, there was really no change to the purpose of the policy. A couple of typos that were cleaned up. On the bottom of page 1, under rules and exclusions and restrictions, we did include that the parks are open year-round for the enjoyment of the public. I think we certainly are trying to get more people into the parks to enjoy our beautiful parks. So it's important that they know that they are open year-round. On page 2, number 6, recreational activities that are permitted will be between May 1st and October 14th, which is in tandem with the parking meter season. Well, we don't necessarily permit the recreational activities during the metered times of 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. It kind of gives us a seasonal period where those recreational activities are permitted. Number 7, and this speaks to that time period where the policy stood silent from October through April. So businesses and organizations may apply for a recreational activity for October 15th through April 30th. However, they would not be charged a permit fee during that time period. And the thought behind that is, in those winter months, you're typically not going to get a lot of yoga instructors out in the parks, the boot camps, that sort of thing, but it still allows for that activity to occur. So they will still have to apply for a permit, but the fee will not be applicable. Moving down to number 13 and 14, one of Mayor and Council's concerns was being able to, as a athletic organization or a yoga organization, whatever the case might be, if you're out in a park or on the beaches, to be able to have directional signage that, this is where this group is meeting at 7 o'clock in the morning. The previous policy excluded signage for that purpose. The policy states that any signage does have to be in conformity with the city's ordinance on signs. And the signs need to be temporary, obviously, just on the day of the event and during the time period of that activity. Moving down to approved locations and times, we did, the policy had not been revised to show that the parking meters a couple of years ago were changed from 6 to 8 p.m. So we just made that clarification of the times for Johnny Walker Beach and Savannah Beach. And then moving to the next page, we got to the fee schedule. I have shown in there what you reviewed at the April council meeting when it was presented. And then below that is what the work group and Parks and Rec have approved and moved forward for your review and consideration. So they gave two fees. And it's an incremental increase from 2023 to 2027. They added the two-tier fee structure because we do have some activities that are only, the owner is only requesting 7 days through the whole season, where other business owners are asking for 7 days a week for the full season. And I can give you some examples from this past season. So if you are a business owner who, would like to do 5 days through the season, that will cost $50. If you are a business owner that wants to do 120 days, that would cost $150. So they would jump up to the maximum permit fee. And then moving from year to year, there's a $25 increase on the maximum permit fee, but the $10 for, the less remains the same. So there's a max out on each season if you're doing the whole season.
Janet, do you envision, like, so let's say I come in tomorrow or when this gets enacted, I give you $150. That gives me basically unlimited. And so am I at that point saying from 8 in the morning to 9 in the morning, I get this square on the beach and that's mine. I've paid my money and I get that spot.
Correct. Yep. And there's, like other activities in the park and on the beaches particularly, we let people know that they are public spaces. So they can't ask people to move because they're having a wedding or they're doing a yoga class or thing, and they're aware of that. So let me just give you a couple of examples that might clarify the fee structure. This past summer, we had a yoga business owner that requested 7 dates for providing yoga either in a park or on the beach. We had another yoga business owner that requested 33 days. We had another yoga business owner who requested 126 days, basically the entire season, 7 days a week. And then we had a boot camp that requested 3 days for the whole season. So you can see the range of activity, and there was just one flat fee of $100. So that was part of the reason to kind of make that distinction for the business owners. It's actually fairer for the business owners with what we have proposed.
I appreciate that.
Makes sense.
Mayor, I've got a question. Is that okay? Would this apply to the full moon bonfires?
Certainly a different kind of recreation, but it is commercial
Okay.
because people are paying to come to that.
So
Yeah.
would they get this and the bonfire permit?
Yes,
Okay.
they would have to have both
Okay.
because the bonfire is separate.
Okay.
But they definitely are a commercial recreation.
So
And
when
is
someone
that-
comes in, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
What I was gonna say, so when someone comes in, and describes the type of event, you educate them on, you're gonna need this and this.
Correct, correct.
And I thought when this was discussed during the spring, and I apologize for not being better prepared to have this discussion because I should have gone back and checked my notes, but I thought we discussed at that time the concern about the commercialization of our beaches in this example, where we were trying to discourage people actually commercializing by reserving the space, getting a permit, and then charging people to come to use what is in fact a public space. So what you've just described, I think, suggests that there is that kind of commercialization going on.
So it's been happening and the businesses don't necessarily always put that forward, but the perspective of the Parks and Rec Commission is that we don't have a formal recreational program.
Right.
And so that this becomes our recreational program. So I think it's a balance. And certainly part of that commercialization was the signage issue. But I think part of the discussion back in April was, well, if you're going down to the beach and you're looking for a group, they should be able to have a sign to say, here's where
Right.
we are.
I understand that
yeah.
part of it, but I'm talking about for the example you just gave about the
Full moon.
people,
Mhm.
right? And with that concessionaire or whatever, well, that person becomes a concessionaire in many ways, doesn't he or she?
So the question becomes, do we include it in this? Do we let them go on as they have, or do we prohibit them? And I think if we prohibit it, there's going to be a lot of blowback. because they've been
There
doing it for
was,
a few
yeah,
years.
there was from one business owner who we know they've been charging, they call it a donation.
Right.
It's not a donation, it's a charge. It says right on the website that there's a fee.
We
We've
can't
been
get it.
allowing it for years. I think this is a way for us to control it a little more. We only had 4, but if you include the bonfire, we would have 5 recreational permits this past year.
Well, having seen the first go round on this, Janet, and looking at how it's broken down now by the $10, I think that's a hell of a fair way to do this. Thank you.
And I don't question that part about the cost per day fee structure. What is your thinking? What was the committee's thinking about the $25 bump per year? What is that about?
I think it was just as things, as the activity may grow, to be able to regulate it and almost regulate it by cost.
So by,
But-
in effect, discouraging it?
Not discouraging it, but I think there clearly was an inequity between businesses that were using it through the whole season and those that were just using it for a couple of days. So, and it was also a very small revenue generation for the city. The city is providing, while it is public, it is an amenity for the businesses to be able to get their guests outside and, you know, being in another environment. So it's an amenity to them.
might make a comment. So I sat on Parks and Recreation Commission for some years, and we had discussions prior to this, the ones that took place earlier this year,
Mhm.
about this very subject. And we had a lot of public input supporting the activities that are there, yoga classes and other things. And clearly, when we were discussing the fee structure, it does not begin to cover the time of the city staff to manage such things. These fees aren't going to pay the salaries of the folks that are doing all the work. But it is in an effort to say, these are public spaces and there should be some contribution there. So I concur with this and support your efforts on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more question I'd like to ask. How many people asked for the permit fee this year? I'm talking about the one that would give them a blanket permit to do.
One.
There was one.
Yes, everybody else, that was 126 days. It went from May 28th to October 15th.
Right.
And the others were, one was 33 days, one was 7 days, and one was 4.
Right.
The one that went for the 120, that were they on the beach?
Yes.
And how many of those days did they actually exercise that permit, the privilege?
I don't have that information. I mean, if it was raining, they cancel. If there's a nor'easter.
Really?
Yeah.
How about that?
Does that happen around here?
Okay, and we'll have to have this on and
Thank you.
approve on a regular meeting.
This will go on the November agenda. You have a few things here that'll move to the next agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so we already did E2. Before I move on, someone suggested last time when we got one of these meetings that maybe I'd take a break. We've been in here about 2 hours, so if people want to have why don't we take like a 5-minute
Thank you.
bathroom
Appreciate
break if people want to stretch their legs a bit and then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll after.
If I had known, I would have waited.
We appreciate.
Well, we won't get out of session here. We'll just take for the folks online, we're gonna take a 10-minute or
Thank
so
you.
break and come out 5 after 11. Yeah.
Appreciate that much.
Yeah.
It's starting to get cold. It caused it to go down by 10.
No, please.
I need a shirt. I need a shirt.
Can we get a motion for whether or not we're gonna turn up the heat?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Wearing a jacket.
Feels good.
meat architecture right now. All right.
No, I think it actually changed it more than two.
All right, I'm gonna go off of it's 11:05, so we're gonna
Changed it more than two.
now move on to the next item.
What is that? E3. Yep.
Come on, Dennis, find your seat, Reardon.
Hey, I haven't spoken yet.
All right, so we have already covered E2 those online that maybe would tune in late. We covered that earlier, and so we are now on E3, which is an update of how this past summer 2022 parking went and recommendations for beach parking for 2023.
So this isn't actually recommendations. This is an update on how things went over the summer and where we're picking up and moving forward. So, and Candace and I have certainly talked about this, so we are not stepping on each other, but as common things come up, we will certainly make sure we coordinate and don't step on each other. So in February 21, council approved some recommendations from the beach parking ad hoc committee and assigned staff with the job of developing kind of the implementation for it. One of those recommendations was development of a permit program for Lewes Beach. So we did a whole lot of work last year. We had in January of 2022, we had a public workshop where it was an online virtual workshop, and we had scheduled 2 specific times where we would do a presentation and take questions. We never actually broke down between the 2. It
Like
literally
three-
just
three
kind of
straight
went for like 3 straight hours of questions. So then we put a form online to request, public feedback. And with that, we received over 400 comments from more than 250 people. So what we did, Melody did the fun work here, was kind of broke it up and categorized it by different things. And that is on a spreadsheet. This report links to that. Anything that is blue and underlined is a hyperlink. Last February, we provided mayor and council with a beach parking implementation report, and that kind of showed where we were in the process, but recognized that with the volume of comments we received, we could not do a public process justice by trying to rush to develop recommendations for a parking permit system for last summer. So we asked for more time to do that, and we had some interim recommendations. There was a public hearing last March, and then certain implementations were approved. So there were 3 specific measures that I kind of want to provide an update. One was that Lewes Beach residences that had no off-street parking would have 2 parking spaces provided. We have done that. In talking to Dennis, it worked out. It took a little bit. We ended up providing hang tags. But ultimately that worked out over the summer. One of the things was to codify the emergency access streets within the code. We have not done that yet, still working on that. But then the other thing was to delineate parking at Roosevelt Inlet. So if Melody, if you go to, and then the other thing we did is we continued to have parking enforcement also patrol the streets along the Cedar Street corridor. So if you can go to page 3 of this report, Melody, you can see that we issued a total of 486 citations along the corridor. 115 of them were at Roosevelt Inlet. 235 of them were on Cedar Street itself, and then the remainder were distributed. And then if you go, Melody, to page 5 of the attachment, Dennis has here, what the parking infractions were that were cited. So 169 of them were parking where parking is prohibited at all times. 98 of them were parking not in the lines when parking in the lines were required. So again, it still adds up to 486. So our staff team that includes our internal staff and GMB reconvened in September, met again just this last week, and kind of developed our timeline and task list for what we will be doing over the next couple of months. So the one question is, should the reserve parking on Lewes Beach continue? So at this point, unless there's action to change it, I believe it would continue. Do we need to make changes to the delineation of parking at Roosevelt Inlet? Last year, council opted not to install a parking meter and to keep it as free parking. That council will have the opportunity to see if we want to keep it that way or start to charge. The big question is, is a parking permit system for Lewis Beach advantageous to the city? And we don't necessarily, we're going to provide kind of the framework of what a parking system could look like, even if we at the staff level determine we don't think it's a great idea. Because ultimately, if you all decide it's a great idea, we need to give you a structure of how it could look. So in looking at that, we will say, do parking spaces need to be delineated? If so, what material would we use? We did meet this week. We had the town manager and parking ambassador, head parking ambassador, they call them ambassadors, from Dewey Beach come and meet with us, and they talked about how it works there, because they do have a very similar street cross section where there's a lot of unpaved area within the right of way that is, that they depend on for parking. They do not delineate the parking. They do not, and on the wider streets, it's head in, but they don't line it. They don't have parking bumpers. And
Estimate how much volume they should be getting on those spots.
they really didn't. They just kind of don't get into that. And then on the places where you parallel park, they have signage that is, kind of on like well into the grass in that area that kind of shows you this is how far off you're supposed to be. And it says that you're supposed to park fully off the pavement. So it does not need to be delineated, but there are ways to do it, especially if we want to do 2 wheels on, 2 wheels off, something like that. So what is the length of the permit itself? Would it be seasonal only? Would you do seasonal, monthly, daily, weekly? Dewey Beach does seasonal. They also do weekend, which is a 3-day Friday, Saturday, Sunday permit. And they do weekly. They don't do a monthly permit. Is there a preference for residents? Do we have a lower rate for residents? Dewey Beach does have a lower rate for residents. No, and I know that in Rehoboth, residents get a certain number of free permits. In Dewey Beach, they do not. They just pay a lower rate. What would the cost be? Would we use a placard, license plate recognition, or a sticker? With a sticker, it's non-transferable. The way Dewey Beach does it with the license plate, you can get a placard hang tag thing. They're trying to push people toward a license plate recognition system. It's not been all that successful yet, but you can have, with one permit, you can have up to 8 license plates associated with that permit. However, 2 of them cannot be parked at the same time. So if parking enforcement goes around and sees 2 of those numbers, the second one they find is going to get a ticket. I find that would be a challenge to manage within a
And
household.
that's all done with like basically automatically scanned
Yeah.
as they drive along.
Yep.
Okay.
The one question is how many permits would be available?
Now, do they oversubscribe?
They do not limit the number of parking permits that they will issue. Last year, they issued 3,000 parking permits or seasonal parking permits. So it does not guarantee you a space.
So that's where I was
Yeah,
going. My
right.
first question is that you can have a permit, but that does not give you a reserve
I thought that
space,
oversubscribed.
correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They have no
That's-
reserve spaces.
All right, so the benefit of the permit in Dewey is that you just
You
get
can
you get a
park.
gold star on your
Yeah,
floor.
well, you
Yeah.
can park with.
If you can find a spot.
It gives you the right.
It gives you the right.
To park.
Right,
As long as it
Doesn't
But it-
guarantee
It
you a
doesn't
spot.
give you.
otherwise it's
guarantee of
metered,
parking, right.
otherwise it's metered,
Right.
right? Is that right?
Well,
I-
they have metered areas.
Areas, but not,
Very few.
right,
Right, they have, the
right.
main metered
So what-
area is down by the rudder.
right,
Yes, right.
all right. So I guess I,
But there's
What
also
benefit
Park
is-
Mobile. There is Park Mobile.
They do have Park Mobile as well. And
well, then that's the same as metered space.
yeah,
Yeah.
They have, they have a number of metered spaces, but the majority of town is permit.
And so were they, it would seem to me that the one attractive piece of this is the lack of sign clutter, the lack of markings and stuff, which I think a lot of people get frustrated with. So,
Right.
and did they indicate it works pretty well? Because I know parking revenue, if it's not the largest, it's like the main source, one of the main sources of their budget.
It's one of their main sources.
Yeah, a revenue.
They don't have a property tax, so.
Right. So the
they-
parking is what they
yeah.
rely on.
The other thing that they do is they box out with
Mm.
yellow paint driveway aprons. So even if you don't have, like, one of the things that we have had a problem with is where you've got a property owner there that they have,
It's too tight.
they pull into the grass.
Right.
But they don't have a delineated driveway. And it's 20 feet. It's not wider than 20 feet.
They allowed 20-foot wide driveway?
I'm pretty,
in
did he say
Dewey?
20 feet?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
I'm pretty sure he said
We'll
20
find
feet.
out.
Yeah, he said 20 feet. So, but they actually paint that on the street in front of the driveways.
So they paint a box on the street. and
It's
the fence.
just, it's three sides.
Right,
So,
an open box.
so, and then we look at where should signage be installed and what's the all-in cost? What, based on whatever fee we would propose, does it cover the cost? Is it additional revenue? Those are the things. So our goal,
And are they doing this in-house? Sorry, to interrupt. Are they doing this in-house or have they hired an outside company to kind of administer the whole?
no, they
They do it
have
all
their
now.
parking ambassadors,
Okay.
run
And
the
there's
program.
the equivalent of their street maintenance department is able to do the marking on the streets and so
They
forth.
have a one-person street maintenance
Okay.
department. So,
Very
yeah.
nice.
So our goal is to, we have meetings scheduled about twice a month through the middle of December. And our plan is to provide you with clear recommendations at the January meeting. And because there's no late December workshop, we don't have the ability to send it to a workshop first. But at that meeting, you all can decide to have a public hearing or, however you want to manage it. It would allow us to, if you wish to implement a permit system, that would give us enough time to implement it effectively before the start of the season.
Dennis or Chief, the data that you showed us for this past summer, do you have full data from last year to compare whether this was up or down from the previous year? Do you know, were there more,
Can you come to the?
Come on up, Dennis.
Do you, so you said you can get it, and so we can get that out to you, but do you know off the top of your head if it's more or less?
I don't know. I
Okay.
think the first year is probably less than last year.
Okay,
We had more issues at Roosevelt. This year,
yes,
because it
you did.
was,
delineating?
we
Yeah, sure.
implemented it, a nice parking
Sure.
capability there. But I can get that data.
okay.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
helpful to see. Yeah.
Oh, yes. So for the record, Dennis, your name?
Oh, Dennis Crawford.
Before you leave, I have a question for him.
Yeah, go ahead.
Come on.
So,
You come to the podium so the audience.
Go ahead and identify yourself, Sumner.
Sumner Crosby, 558 Pilot Town Road. I really appreciate this tabulation. I used to live on the beach and I was always curious how this would work out. Can you explain what the parking prohibited at all times? Where are those? What are those situations if we were out in the area? What?
That's just no parking signs where it's no parking.
Like on this side of the street, say, go park on this side of the street.
Yeah, where there are signs that say no parking and in Roosevelt Inlet, there's
This is
a couple
on the
no
beach.
parking signs there and also
I think
a
it's in the-
bicycle rack, which is a no
Yeah,
parking area.
Okay.
And then if we have a permitted space, which we did this year for people who do not have a driveway, and they have to call us and say, hey, there's someone parked in my area. Then we go down and that would be a no parking area for someone that's not supposed to be there without a hang tag.
Are those areas marked?
Yes, there's signs.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dennis. If you get us
Thank you,
that data,
Dennis.
that'd be useful to see the trend. It's up or down.
So that's really just wanted to share with you kind of what we did see this year and then what our work plan is for the next month and a half to get you something.
So are there any that we want to kill now, for example, or do we want to wait on all these? Because like, for example, I know Roosevelt Inlet and the idea of metering there was always something that people were sensitive to. So do we want to take that off of their plate to begin with, or do we want to study that?
I think we should look at all options that are
All right.
going to be presented by them and then evaluate everything together
Okay.
holistically.
I do see that Aaron said, will a parking program interfere with the maintenance of the Lewes Beach by the Corps of Engineers? And that is certainly one of the things that we would reach out to the Corps. I do think that having something that has a strong residential lean
Mhm.
to residency requirements or something could adversely affect us, but I think as long as they're okay with paying for parking,
Sure.
as long as we're not telling people they can't access the beach.
So I did some research on the Army Corps of Engineer regulations with regard to this beach replenishment and the parking question. So the regulation is abundantly clear, and the emphasis is on public access to the areas adjacent to the beaches and adjacent to public access to the beaches. And so you will not see the Corps supporting us if we're giving limited access to the public,
Right.
you know, and they want to be certain that the dollars that are provided for beach replenishment don't come from Lewis. They come from the rest of the country, and they
So I
will
think-
not support us. So we want to be very careful about all that.
And maybe any program that we end up coming
Yeah.
and coalescing around, we would want to run past them to make sure
Yeah.
that we're not. in
And you've got a
violation.
relationship with the Corps folks that will make these decisions. So I'd encourage that. But especially, not, making certain that it's not just a restricted area. That's really, there have been other communities along the seaboard that have run afoul of that. And the Corps says, flag on the play, stop.
Mhm. Okay, well, appreciate that. And as just to be clear to the public, this is just an introduction of some of the past things that we've discussed as issues and a revisit of some of last year's. Now, will there be opportunity for feedback on the GMB parking study, or was that study accepted as whole and accurate? So I think this may relate also to the study that Candace is doing. And I think the answer there is that Candace will use that as a basis and go around and talk with stakeholders to get some clarification around that if people feel there are comments to be made. Yeah.
Right, so just for clarity, GMB did not do a parking study. What they did last year as we were evaluating beach parking is they did a
Delineate.
potential delineation plan. Which was something that Candace used as one of her data sources.
Right. But they did two things. They did one like with almost 600 or so that included accessing right of ways. And then they
Right.
did another one with delineated without right of ways, which was 300, 200. I can't really remember.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, for Bobby's concern, I think that's just part of the
database.
calculation here. Yeah,
It's data that's available.
it's data is available, but it's not a final product.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on then to E4, which is a discussion regarding enforcement or provision of Chapter 95, Section 95-1, gasoline powered landscaping equipment. So
Do you want me to explain?
yeah, sure. I mean, a couple of years, I can start us off. A couple of years ago, we did pass this regulation, which had most gas powered handheld gas powered lawn equipment we would want to see graduated out by 2025. This one was the hedge trimmers, I think will be
Yeah,
kicked in this year. That would be, we said the technology should be there. So Emery, why don't you suggest why this is, on here now?
so there's a couple of things. One, based on the ordinance, the effective date of this would be December 31st of this year.
Right.
And one of the things when that was passed was we kind of acknowledge that we may need to revisit it as it relates to where technology is. If you recall, we got a lot of feedback from landscape contractors that the life of the batteries for these battery powered equipment was not sufficient to kind of do the jobs that they're hired to do. And there was concern expressed by them about that. Additionally, the city is about to put our landscape contract out to bid. And if this provision goes into effect in this year, we will need to make sure we get that in our bid specifications, and it could change the bidding environment. I don't believe that there has been any major progression in the longevity of the batteries in the past couple of years. So I think that this is still, it will still be a challenge for, I think particularly the landscape contractors, because, you know, they're going into to do a job and then go on to the next job. And to the degree that the batteries cause a constraint there, that could affect their ability to do their jobs. It could end up costing people more money on those services. So, you know, again, I think that the question is, do you want to push back enforcement of the handheld? And it really is the hedge trimmers in this case, because it's other than leaf blowers, chainsaws, and string trimmers, which are weed whackers. Those things don't become non-gas powered until December 31st, 2025. So do you want to push all of it out to 2025, or do you want to continue in this year?
And Rehoboth has taken this up recently, right?
In a while, they did take it up. I don't recall the way. I think the ordinance did not pass. I know there was discussion about it, but they did not implement it, as my record.
Okay, but did they have target dates set out in advance, or was it one of those things where?
I don't think it ever got far enough that it got into ordinance form. Let me do a moment and I'll take a
Okay.
look and try to remember exactly.
Yeah, I
what
was
it
just
but-
curious whether they had set out target dates that were different or for this year.
Can you explain further, Emery, what handheld, what else? I think we talked about this briefly. Would that also include a power washer?
So, yeah, it's funny because we had a discussion about this, and power washers are not technically landscape equipment, because
Right.
people aren't power washing.
They use their boat or.
Grass.
their house.
Right,
So they're not covered.
they're not covered.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
So, so when we looked at it, you know, so what this says is effective the end of this year, gasoline powered landscaping equipment other than leaf blowers, chainsaws, and string trimmers shall not be operated in the city. So the only piece of landscape equipment that meets that we could really think of was a hedge trimmer. And then.
And I think that's why that was selected, because I think for that particular piece of equipment, there was the feedback that, you know, like, oh, plug them in, or that one could work well as a battery powered equipment, whereas a chainsaw and a
Right.
blower just wasn't there from a power required standpoint, but that hedge trimmers were. Now, whether that's changed, I don't know. I mean, I'll be honest.
And also hedge trimmers are not typically run for hours at a time. You know, they are, you know,
Yeah.
they're episodic, and those episodes are fairly short. And I was part of the council when we voted this in. And the idea, I believe, was that we recognize that the technology is evolving, and it's evolving quickly. And there are more and more products that are being in the marketplace that are available, which are not gasoline dependent, but in fact are battery powered. And the capacity of the batteries is increasing as well in that product line. So this was a very phased in, measured approach when it was enacted. is my recollection, and it would remain that way.
What's eliminating everything? I mean, it
It's a
doesn't make,
very
it doesn't
slow
make sense.
phase in.
Well,
Sense here.
the only thing that would be eliminated after this year that we could think of would be the hedge trimmers.
Because it's leaving in, you know, it's not affecting leaf blowers, chainsaws, string trimmers.
Right, until 2025.
You know,
So
What do we-
3 years out, right?
So I think
I mean, we don't have anything to work here. with.
Well, what I would say is what, and then I think to Anne Marie's point, since it's coming up in a couple of months, essentially, I think it's good to hang a lantern on it that this is coming up. And if there's appetite on behalf of any two council members to get this on an agenda to amend it, we
Then-
can put it on the next meeting and we can
Yeah.
amend it. What I would, for those that are interested in doing that, to have, if you have suggestions like the date, whether you're gonna exempt certain
Piece of-
contractors versus residents, I mean, but I think that would be the next step, because we're not here to take action on this now, it's really to just again, put it out there to the community, this is in there. So if there is no amendment, the expectation will be that you use a battery powered or a plug-in hedge trimmer next
Well,
year.
if this is technology driven, I mean, you know, we don't have answers for this.
Okay,
Yeah, but it's
So I do have
already that,
an
right?
update on Rehoboth.
Yeah.
So Rehoboth is considering it, but it's at the environment committee level now. It hasn't risen to the commissioners. What they are proposing
okay.
is a ban on handheld gas powered, but it would be effective December 31st, 2023, but not actually go into effect for commercial lawn care providers until the end of 2024, and local residents would have to the end of 2025 to make a switch. So they're on the
Similar
23rd.
timelines,
Right.
Okay.
Is it?
but it's not out of
And this has
committee
been on
yet.
the book since when?
Thanks for that, Glenn.
December 2020.
Yeah.
Is that when you did?
Okay.
Yeah, so.
So if there's action to be taken on this, either the next November or December meeting, otherwise this will go in effect and
Yeah.
I mean, that's the intention. Okay,
Okay.
all right. Shall we have Miss Eballs, are you prepared to come up, or your cohort to discuss? So Deb and her ad hoc committee have been working on a tree ordinance for, well, you go ahead and tell us, for quite some time now, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so
and,
go ahead and take it over.
I'll just say that we have not actually been working on a tree ordinance yet. Our subcommittee has been researching the information so that we can give some feedback, a report to you. And we're going to be seeking feedback about whether we should actually write and develop an ordinance. So I wanted to be clear on that going in, and clear to anyone who's listening in. Our plan is to present the information today. I presented at the Lewes Planning Commission last week. I guess this is online as well. And then we're going to take your feedback, and sometime, hopefully, if we're progressing down this road, we're going to set up a public workshop that's just going to be informational, and also seek the mass of great human resource that we have in this community on that topic. So I first want to start off and thank the committee and identify them and thank them. I'm the chairman of the committee, Deborah Evalds, resident of Lewes, Delaware, and member of Lewes Planning Commission. Joe Hockner and Rich Innes, who are on the LPC, are also on the committee, or the subcommittee, pardon me. Marty Thompson, who is also our tree commissioner through the Department of Parks and Rec, is on the subcommittee. Mary Linda Maddie, who is a Lewes resident, and also we are going to be adding a new member who has a lot of experience as a tree tender in the Philadelphia program through the PHS up there. And that is Rick Spitzborg, who is here with us today. So Rick's going to be joining us on our next meeting, which is next week. First of all, I'm not going to go far down this road because I think I'm preaching to the choir. The overview and the need for a tree ordinance in Lewes. We are a tree city. We need to protect our trees. We need to protect existing trees, and we also need to make sure that we're growing our canopy, not losing our canopy. What we're seeing is, as we have more redevelopment and expansion of existing properties, sometimes replacement of existing properties, we're starting with smaller homes and they're getting larger. That results in a loss of trees. Also something that we've discussed and we will discuss more is the role of the trend towards big hardscaped lawns. We lose trees with pools and hardscaping. We have heard from citizens for years. I'm going to go back and credit Nina Cantata, always brought this up. And Amory is grinning. I said to her when I got on the LPC, I'm picking up the fight. I will be the Lorax. So here we are today. And we've been hearing from a lot of citizens that they're concerned about some of the city's heritage and specimen trees, and they don't want to lose those trees. The City of Lewes adopted a resolution to increase the tree canopy from 34 to 38%. And our subcommittee believes a tree ordinance for the City of Lewes would support the Parks and Recreation in meeting that goal and hopefully surpassing it. I think we just need to stay on a growth trajectory. You know, we're in a sensitive environmental area. All you need to do is look at areas up and down the East Coast. And as development has come, there's been more flooding and we need to preserve what we've got and hold this piece of land. So we're talking about a multi-prong approach with an ordinance that would identify and preserve our remarkable historic trees, preserve not every tree, but specific mature trees on private property, increase public education about the value of planting trees, correct planting and care, which is something Parks and Rec is already doing. So we would coordinate with them. Create a tree planting requirement for properties being redeveloped and create protections for existing trees that are on construction sites. I'll go into detail on each one of those points in a few minutes. These goals would require a change in the zoning code, and they would also potentially create either staffing or a tree commission. And that's something really the city council would ultimately have to decide and recommend to us, I think, what they're seeking. But there's no denial that some skilled individuals, we would need an arborist, volunteers who are not tree experts, including myself, have no place doing that job. We would have to put in a fee system to fund the costs of the program. We're not looking to create a lot of expense for the city. And we are not looking to heap more work onto city employees that are already very overworked with a lot of burdens on their plate.
So you're talking about increasing this staff to do this?
There could be, I think we need to explore the
No,
scope.
but
We
is
need
that
to-
what you're saying?
I'm saying it could be a possibility of a fuller part-time arborist or getting a consultant.
Right. Yeah, contractor.
Yeah, we had someone from Henlope and Acres he is the consultant who manages it. And while they're a much smaller municipality, they do have a lot of trees over there.
Mhm.
And that's one of the municipalities we looked at. The other reason that a tree ordinance in Lewes is so overdue, we discovered as we dove into this. We realized that during our research that other jurisdictions in our region have a lot more state and county protections for trees and buffers than Delaware or Sussex County do. And it makes a local ordinance less needed in those areas. Particularly, Maryland has protected critical areas since 1986. I've never lived in Maryland. This was news to me, but they define these critical areas as all land and water areas within 1,000 feet beyond the landward boundaries of tidal wetlands, the bay and its tributaries. All development and land disturbing activities which within the critical area are guided by specific provisions found in the state adopted critical area criteria and the local critical area programs. These provisions cover issues from clearing trees and removing vegetation to limiting areas of impervious surface. This state legislation provides protection for trees, but then on top of that, other Maryland counties here on the Eastern Shore, like even Wacomico, which I don't think we would look at as something we would strive to be, West Ocean City or even Berlin, they have more protections for trees than we do. So mull that over. The other thing about the critical area law is that it requires that no net loss of forest or developed woodland cover in the critical area. And the actual administration and how it's done is done by individual municipalities, and spoke to some municipalities about that. Sometimes there is they're going to remove, a half acre of forest. Well, whoever removes it may be required to plant another half acre of forest under the supervision of the local municipality. So they're ending up with no net loss and no loss of tree canopy. And I think we need to move towards that. A problem was we looked at the individual tree ordinances was that this made the ones in Maryland not really be that applicable because they had so many state and county level protections. And so when we got down to it, the most comparable areas for us to look at were Rehoboth Beach and Henlopen Acres, which both regulate public and private trees. So our process was, we started off having Marty present and educate us all in detail about Chapter 177, which is our city trees code. And this covers all of our park trees, street trees, and trees on public land. Chapter 177 does not address trees on private property. So to reiterate, Rehoboth Beach, Henlopen Acres are regulating trees on private property. Lewes is not.
How are they doing this?
Well, I know that legally they have had some issues, I guess, in Rehoboth Beach, some challenges. We are going to be working very closely with Glenn when we get to this point there. When we actually sit down to write an ordinance, I imagine, Glenn, you'll be with us at every meeting. And we would hope to develop an ordinance that would ward off challenges. I think that Henlopen Acres has had fewer issues, but they even legislate, removal of shrubs and things like that. We're not just talking about trees. So we examined a lot of different tree ordinances from North Carolina to mainland Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, urban, different ones. We tried to find exemplary programs, but programs that geographically made a lot of sense to look at, which is why we went down as far as North Carolina. A lot of the city codes just did public trees, like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. And we took some great ideas from those programs because they were exemplary. But with the codes that covered private trees, we looked more at smaller municipalities. We have an unusual situation because, again, we have a tree code, but it only covers public trees. We have no desire or intent to change anything there because it's working well. So our recommendation, or not recommendation, but our findings would indicate that just looking at a zoning change would probably be the best approach for Lewes. As we examined the other codes, what we found out were there were a lot of common elements, standards, and features. And these are, related to arborists. These include identifying the trees to be protected by diameter or caliper size at designated heights, identifying specific heritage or specimen trees, tree planting requirements. It's often like if you're building, you're going to need to plant, 8 trees or 20 trees per acre, whatever that may be. There are permits usually required to remove trees that are the private trees are identified as needing to be saved. There are fees and forms for removal or replacement of trees. Usually there are tree lists or resources for of preferred trees and forbidden trees. And there's administration of tree ordinances either by tree commissions or highly qualified tree inspectors. The reason that I brought up the idea of tree inspectors is that I know a oft repeated complaint in Lewis is that we have a lot of committees. And I'm leaving that to mayor and city council. That would just be my only comment on there. And again, stressing we are going to need some skilled people who have the depth of knowledge.
Right.
So we've identified 5 specific areas, and I think I'll just hit them one
Yeah, I
by
was gonna say,
one.
because if we got about 5 minutes on this one, so if you could touch on
Yep.
each one about a minute each or so, would that
Yep.
work for you? Okay.
Absolutely. First idea, because a lot of them I've touched on already, is number 1, identification and protection of remarkable trees. These are our special heritage and specimen trees. So we'd like to start a remarkable trees designation. People could nominate trees they know of in the community, or their own trees, and maintain a list of these important heritage species trees. We would create specific guidelines, of course, and that is outlined here, but some examples would be the bride and groom trees, the big ginkgo tree on the Verdon property, but there are many others. In addition, this would also require a tree survey, and there is, again, outlined in one of these bullets, a variety of ways that a tree survey could be done, from the simplest, asking residents to participate in an online survey, all the way down to contracting a professional survey, which Rehoboth Beach did in 2010. They contracted Davy Tree. We would suggest enacting heftier fines for removal of these trees, because these are not run-of-the-mill trees. And also exempt any trees that were damaged by or destroyed by natural disaster. We'd also like to look into some incentives for homeowners to help them care for the remarkable trees on their property. But more research and cost analysis is needed on that. The second area is preserve existing trees on private property, which would be identified by specific criteria. Again, we would need a tree survey, so I won't need to repeat that. We would have to develop very, very specific criteria of the trees that should be protected. Based on the industry standards and other ordinances, we would suggest measuring trees at DBH, which is diameter of breast height, generally 4.5 feet, and regulate the removal of trees that are over a certain caliber measurement. We conservatively suggested in the 6 to 12 inch range, based on, we saw that some that were as small as 4 inch, but we are leaning more towards that. I also want to add here that planting, huge trees isn't always successful either. That we have to look about what's our canopy going to look like in 10 and 20 years, and what trees are going to survive. So that's where an arborist comes in again.
Right.
Number 3, education and outreach to support property owners and help them select and sustain the right tree for the right place, which is kind of a mantra of people who are professionals in this field. We would either develop a brochure that we would give to people, help, coordinate with Parks and Rec and enhance the website and get a list going, but we may actually just be able to use resources that already exist and not reinvent the wheel. Number 4 is a little trickier. It's developing a tree planting requirement for new construction applications or renovation applications that exist the present dimensional footprint. What I want to stress on this, tree planting requirements would not apply to any homeowner who is just not disrupting the land that they live on. If there is a major disruption of the land, In Henlip and Acres, it's if they exceed it by over 400 square feet. By putting on an addition, then you would start to open yourself up for this. If it becomes a new building permit where a house is removed and a new house is replacing it, it would automatically fall under this category. And this is a very standard feature of most tree ordinances. And let me also say, sometimes you get into replacement of trees at this point. Not necessarily, there's a tree that's, unless it's a heritage tree, that's near where you want to put an addition on your house. Of course, that would not be something, I don't think that anyone will be comfortable with saying, no, you cannot. So instead, that might be a case where you're going to remove that tree, but you're going to replace some other trees. And there would be, we suggest requiring 1 tree per 2,500 square foot of property, as that conforms really well with our lot sizes, and obviously 2 trees per 5,000 square, et cetera, et cetera. The suggested minimum size for new trees would be 1.5 to 2 inch in caliber and 5 to 6 foot high, which is the current standard in our subdivision code. Again, we would give them the right tree, right place, and offer support so that the trees would last on watering, planting, mulching, all of that. And the last thing is create construction requirements to protect and preserve trees that are on or near excavation and or construction. So sometimes trees are left and then equipment is parked on the roots, or there's a dumpster, and then the tree dies in a year or 2 or 10. And what we want to do is make sure that an arborist takes a look at the property. This is also standard practice in many, many municipalities. And then we suggest putting fencing like 2 feet beyond the drip line of the tree, so that the tree roots are not disturbed and the trees can live through construction, their natural life. This prevents having to go back and be punitive in the future, which some tree ordinances have. Some tree ordinances have it very specifically. If the tree on this construction site dies in 2 years, we're going to come back and you'll be assessed this fine. Right. That's also just a rabbit hole. So we propose creating guidelines to protect the mature trees and make sure that they're going to continue to thrive. So that is pretty much all the points here. You have all the information. Does anyone have any questions today?
I just had a process question. You say you'll go back to LPC, get their recommendation, and that would come before council. That would sort of be how you'd see it going? Or?
Yeah, I want to actually put it out there next, I think, to the public. Get feedback from you, and then put it out for a public workshop where people can come and give us their thoughts and ideas. We have some great, I've been saying that at every meeting, inviting people, and I want to keep it an open door and do that next. And then, get more as when we get to the point where we actually draft an ordinance, do it with Glenn, then get feedback from the LPC, and then bring it to you. So we're asking you what you think early.
I think the way you've tackled it and bucketed it makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. And the way that you're acknowledging you're working with Marty so that you're not sort of stepping on what's
absolutely
already
not. She was like the first person I may have asked to be on this.
Yeah. Deborah, thank you very much for this presentation, and thank you for your subcommittee members. Great job. I do have a question. I know you focused on saying that there would be a need for a zoning change, I believe is what you said.
Yes, I believe that would probably be, again, this is an idea I'm throwing back to you.
Right.
I think that would be the most logical way to manage it. And we've spoken with Janelle a lot on that.
Okay. And in number 5 of your bulleted items that you suggested is the construction piece.
Yes.
And would that also fall under the zoning, or would that actually be something that we would have to put into the building code, the Lewes building code?
I'm thinking it would fall under the zoning, because that would also apply to it would apply to minor and major subdivisions. It would apply to just homes.
Individual lots.
Yes.
Right, right.
Yeah, so it's typically something we would see as part of a subdivision if they're
Right.
gonna protect trees and then have that kind of delineated on their site plans and
Right.
plan sheets. So typically you'd probably see that it could be either in the subdivision code, subdivision land development code, chapter 170, or it could be in chapter 197, depending on the path it takes. Because we for the landscaping requirements, we have some specific items. So that actually could be added to
Right.
there for the
And
landscaping requirements for just anything. if we're
Yeah,
gonna
and but-
protect trees.
And Janelle, what I'm speaking to is the fact that, as Deborah described, with homes being torn down and lots being redeveloped, that the loss of, or the need to manage the trees that are existing on that lot become more paramount. And it seems to me that we can't just think of tracts of land being developed. We need to think of individual lots in addition to tracts of land.
That's absolutely where I was, where
Again, it could fall into two different
Right.
places. So it depends on what council thinks the subcommittee should focus on, because they provided 5 different options for you guys to consider. So you guys can prioritize what you think the subcommittee should be working on. So then we can start these. We didn't go into detail into any of these because we wanted to make sure, okay, what should this look like to make sure council's on board with it before they get too far into the weeds.
to the actual writing, but
Yes.
I'm going to be greedy here. I think all 5 are important, and I'm going to ask Mayor and City Council to consider and suggest that we move forward on all 5 points, because I think they're all important.
Yeah. Really good job.
I mean, I think we're not objecting. I don't think that's the only thing we could do today, right?
Yeah.
No
We're
one's
not
strong with
able to take
strenuously
action.
objecting, I think, to your direction.
And is
so.
there a way that, and I'll ask Glenn, I guess, like, how can we get feedback before we go to public
Listening.
hearing? So in the prelim stage, how can we get feedback from Mayor and City Council to direct us?
Right.
Today's opportunity for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's things that you heard that you think that they're going the wrong direction on, and certainly now to speak to that.
Yeah, so thank you, by the way. That was a very comprehensive update. With regards to the direction, I think you're going in the right direction. However, I do think with a public hearing, and I also have some concerns about regulation on private property, because what I've seen in other jurisdictions, Glenn and Rehoboth, I've followed that pretty closely. So I would be interested in learning more about maybe not so much mandates on private property owners, but more of a carrot versus a stick approach. I don't know if that's out there, if jurisdictions have incentivized property owners to keep, I think you mentioned 1 tree per to 2,500 square feet, things like that. I don't know if there's something like that, because I do think we're probably going to get, I know I've heard already people concerned about, oh, the city's not going to tell me what trees I can plant on my property. And so I think of all the things you mentioned, the 5 points, that one's going to generate concern and skepticism from some people.
Absolutely. And just to address that, yes, we have spoken at length. How could we make this more of an incentive program? And ideas like the city adopting remarkable trees and caring for them. That was one suggestion, and we talked about it a lot. I worried about the cost on that to taxpayers. Yes, there are going to be concerns, and I expect that there will be people who are not comfortable with that as a concept. To be clear, we're talking about the number of trees that only applies, to the number of trees you would have per acre. That only would apply to those who have pulled permits and are redeveloping properties. The other thing is, as I mentioned, trees per acre does not necessarily mean, no, you cannot remove that tree.
Right.
What it means is that you need to have X trees per acre.
Right.
So there are options on that. And the other thing is, nowhere in this have we offered the directive or the suggestion that we would be telling homeowners what trees they can plant. The state of Delaware has already identified trees that you cannot plant, trees that are invasive species. So that already is jurisdictionally way over our heads. All we want to do is do some education. And I also want to stress that, much of the clear cutting of land and placement of high density housing is occurring outside of the city of Lewes. If we do a lot of outreach on social media and we make the resources for right tree, right place, which ones to plant, that's not going to just help us. That's going to help all of us. And I know that we're here to serve the city of Lewes, but I think our obligation to the greater Delmarva and to the environment in general is also important. And I think this could have a positive impact on that.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
I have one more question for you. Regarding the tree survey that you identify in number 1, do you anticipate that is your idea that, or the committee's idea that each lot in the community in the city would be surveyed and we would the trees that are on the lots would be identified and the locations? Is that what it is, or just the type?
There's with the remarkable trees, absolutely. But we would first seek nomination on that.
Right.
From private individuals. You could recognize a tree in your neighborhood. Many people who have these trees on their property are going to want to have them identified. And, the carrot could be something like a plaque. Arborscope does it is Arborscope, right, Marty? Yeah, does a high level canopy, which, measurements. Right. But I think the depth of the survey, really the direction of what we're going to write as a tree ordinance is going to direct how in-depth the survey is going to be.
But the survey that you speak of here, is that only for the remarkable tree survey, or is that for just trees?
We need to do a survey of our trees.
So it
For
depends
trees.
on which project you would like them to start with. Because again, they've provided 5 options. So if you want to take some time and maybe prioritize which ones you'd like them to start with, then they can focus on that, and then they can kind of narrow down that scope even more.
I think where we're going with this is going to determine the type of survey. Personally, I would rather approach the whole thing holistically because I am that kind of a thinker. But definitely what we are talking about regulating is going to direct what needs to be surveyed. Simply put.
Yeah, well said.
But I think it also might be really informative and wonderful for everyone who lives in the city to actually have a survey of all of our trees and know what we've got out there. And it also would give us some information about where we could guide people to ensure that we have diversity.
Right. And don't I remember correctly that the verdant property trees, I think you identified as
Ginkgo,
ginkgo.
yes,
What wasn't that recognized? I think there are 2 there, am I mistaken? But they're recognized on a state level already. They had some special designation, and then that designation was dropped more recently. Yes, Mary Linda.
Ask it to become Delaware big tree. That's the designation. I don't know if they follow through, but they have to contact Delaware, and then Delaware will be done.
I see. And is that the big tree project, is that superseding a previous labeling thing that the state did?
Mr. Burton, that's what he was going to do.
Okay, because I was under the impression when we were going through the approvals for that project that there was a label already applied by the state.
She's going to speak.
You need to come to the podium.
Oh,
They have already determined that they're going to do their best. That tree is as part of their development.
It was given.
I understand that part, but there was already a label is what I'm saying on the state level, the state forestry. Okay,
Certainly if I'm going to make a note on that. If
Please.
there are some trees already identified.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
That gives us a starting place. if we're doing a city designation of remarkable trees,
It could be-
well, then we would just add it on as another
Exactly.
one.
Great.
So
Thank you.
I
Deborah.
know I've taken enough of your time today and thank you. And please, if there's any other questions, feedback, please get it through the planning commission and we will share that at our next meeting. Our very next is Tuesday after Halloween.
Okay.
So
And what time is that meeting, Deborah?
it's at 6 p.m.
And that's at Verdon? I mean, sorry, at Rollins?
Yes, at the Rollins
Yeah.
Center.
6 p.m. Thank you very
Thanks, Deborah.
much. Thank you very much.
All right, so our last item for today is discussion of possible code amendment to allow for beekeeping in the city of Lewis. And I talked to Emery earlier this week about whether it even, have you pieced together that does spell out that it is it's currently illegal to keep bees, and can you make that connection for us?
In the agricultural use, it is identified as a prohibited use. It's identified, I had it up just a minute ago.
It's identified in the definition of agriculture, which is
agriculture.
prohibited in most zones.
Okay.
So
So-
if you're looking to allow for the
We
beekeeping, we
carve
have
it
to,
out from there.
correct, we would remove that
Okay.
from the definition of agriculture.
Okay, well, I've asked Sumner Crosby just to come in. Sumner, if you want to give some of your bona fides as a specifically race to the beekeeping, and then maybe give us some ideas that we might consider if we want to maybe take this on as a council.
Sumner Crosby, this is on 558 Pilottown Road. Actually, if you don't mind, I'd just like to offer just a comment on the previous discussion. There's a lot of emphasis being placed. I realize you covered a lot of ground. I hope that the city won't focus solely on big trees, right? All it takes is a storm to knock them out, right? I just want you to consider the state of Delaware and its climate plan. Most of you have heard me rant on and on and on about sea level rise, but another whammy associated with climate change is warming. Over the last 120 years, we've experienced 2 degrees warming in this area. It's predicted that over the next several decades, we will get a similar amount of warming. Over the next 60, 70 years, we might see somewhere between 3.5 and 8 degrees of warming. Okay. One of the best ways of managing that increased temperature in terms of how it affects us and how it affects how much we're spending on things like cooling, our homes, is having an adequate canopy. And that can be met not just by big trees, but just having a lot of trees around shading pavement, sidewalk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I look forward to seeing how that goes.
Excellent.
As far as bees.
Yep.
I am one of the principal beekeepers in the Lewis Beekeeping Club. We have a membership of about 50. We are all about education. We are training. I'm one of the principal trainers of beekeepers. We now have about 20 beekeepers who aren't keeping bees in their backyards right now. But I think a number of them would be interested. Many of them live just outside of the city and so on. I've been a beekeeper for about 20 years, off and on. What I would tell you based on everything that I know, that we know, is that there are a lot of different critters out there that we think of as bees. The Western honeybee, Apis mellifera, the one that we principally work with, is a fairly docile creature unless it's provoked, okay? So many of you may have plantings in your backyards where you might see Western honeybees working the plants. They will not bother you. If you go to their home and open their home, as we do periodically, they will take issue with that. They will sting you or try to sting you, consider stinging. If you don't get into their hives, if you stay away from their hives, you're largely safe. So as far, I've by no means did I prepare for a set of detailed suggestions today, but what I would say is things to consider involve safety. Things that might involve some level of setbacks if you were to allow it. I think first and foremost would be some sort of a registration system. The state, by the way, has a set of regulations that require that if you have beehives, that they be registered, I think by the first of the year. That any beehives that are kept have movable frames. Of course, we all want to prevent the various kinds of diseases that can happen and can be spread from my hive to neighboring areas. So there are all sorts of things that could be done with that. But as far as safety in siting, right? I've done a review of a number of municipal ordinances that look at setbacks. Maybe it's not appropriate for a front yard. It might be more appropriate for a side yard or a rear yard. And many places seem to suggest something that might fit with the housing setbacks. In some cases, they recommend things like, well, if you get the permission from the neighbor, maybe you can go right up to the property line. All things to consider and evaluate and so on. One of the critical elements that I would urge would be provision of a water source to attract the bees to that water source in my yard, rather than to your hot tub or pool or fish pond that you may have in your yard, right? Bees, maybe you've heard the term beeline, bees come out of their hive and they are off on a mission to get food wherever they have learned that there's food. And they don't like to stray from that line. That's how beeline comes up. One of the best ways that you can prevent bees from being a problem for people walking around on streets, walking around in backyards nearby, would be to have what's called a flyway screening, something that might be 6 feet high. It could be a fence, it could be shrubbery, it could be whatever, something that basically prevents the bees from coming out and going straight off in the direction they want to go. They actually have to stop, go up before they continue on their route. And that makes it less likely that humans will be hurt in the process of them flying around. The other thing that I've seen is, that there are allowances for putting hives at elevation, right up on a roof, whatever. There are issues there that we would have to evaluate.
Cities are doing that though, right?
Cities are absolutely.
New York City
Yeah.
you're allowed to keep bees in New York City
And on the rooftops.
Right, on
Yes.
rooftops. But again, they're not down at street level where they might mix with people walking innocently down the street. And that's the thing we want to minimize.
Right.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that basically covers it. I'm sure there are other things that if I took a little more time, I could suggest.
Sumner, do you know of municipalities that we could go to look at their existing ordinances or that you were aware of?
Let's looked within the
We
state.
could probably reach out to the Department of Agriculture because, as you know, it's regulated by the Department of Agriculture, so they would likely know where.
Best practices and.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I
I
said.
feel like we might have addressed it when I was in Dover.
Oh, really?
So.
I know we addressed
To
it.
allow it or to
To allow it.
So the Department of Agriculture has a fairly broad set of requirements that
Yeah.
get to what I said earlier about managing diseases. The other thing I didn't mention is bees naturally grow rather exponentially, particularly in the spring. If they don't have enough room to grow, they swarm. So any beekeeper has to have a plan to manage swarms and prevent them from occurring. Obviously there would be recommendations as to how that could be done, but I think it would be a good idea to have some sort of a swarm calling system that basically would allow, those qualified to come and treat them. I'll put the Lewes Beekeeping Club right on that.
The state actually has a honey beekeeping swarm removal list.
Well, we're on that list.
Yeah.
And we're right here. So I'm just saying, we're happy to help in any way that we can. So,
That's helpful.
Sumner, I have a
Yeah.
question. May I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you mentioned, I was writing down the list of things that you were identifying, and one of them was disease.
Mhm.
Is that something that you would expect in the city would write into an ordinance? Is that, how
I
is
think
that?
there's probably a way, and maybe the consultation with the state
Okay.
already has language like that in
Okay.
there. I think that's probably enough to cover.
Yeah,
No
there's-
beekeeper that's keeping bees
Right.
wants to lose their bees to any number of threats. So any beekeeper worth their salt is doing the job of evaluating the health of the hive each and
Okay.
every time they go in.
right,
The
thank
state
you.
has a beekeeping law that all honeybee colonies must be registered and inspected for diseases, mites, and Africanized bees.
Right, and that actually brings up a good point. One provision that I would definitely have in there is that there be no Africanized bees. I mean, it's already in there at the state level, but I
That's the
think
state
it's,
level, right?
yeah, because they are much more aggressive.
Right.
That's exactly what I was gonna ask about. It's like, other than sort of anaphylaxis and other safety issues, are there any other reasons why it would be illegal? It's like for invasive species, is that do they kill other bugs, for example?
Okay, so I'm not prepared to.
That's okay. I mean,
No, to
yeah.
provide some certain level of analysis here, but something I personally have been struggling with. I make presentations to the farmers market,
Yeah.
to various groups
That's right.
often. I think there's an interesting challenge about native pollinators versus domestic bees. I think it's a bigger problem in a highly urbanized area like New York City, where there's a limited amount of plant material. In this area, there's a lot of plant material. And frankly, I could imagine, just as we just heard from the tree guys, there's an opportunity for education in terms of improving the bees are dependent on plants, right? There's an opportunity to increase the wealth and distribution of plants that support all sorts of insects. I walked in as the Great Marsh Park thing was going on, but I'm familiar with what Mr. Wall is doing in promotion of native habitats, and I'm fully behind that. Doug Tallamy's work up at Delaware. We should be doing everything we can to promote a proper level of biomass in every backyard.
Yeah.
But so I'm not worried about domesticated honeybees out competing other creatures.
Great.
Uh-huh.
Well, I appreciate Sandra. And one of the reasons we put this on, I think we've learned is in the past as a council members, if we're going to try something new, it's best to let the public know, and a workshop is a good place to kind of introduce an idea. So I appreciate the knowledge that you've brought to us today.
And I'm happy to work with everybody, if you want to roll up sleeves and develop something. So.
Yeah, I think we'll have to just get a consensus from council whether we want this something that we want to pursue and put on a future agenda. But, like I said, I think the first step of understanding it is indeed illegal to keep bees in Lewes, and what, do we have the appetite to change that? So I appreciate Sumner.
Thank you.
So that actually brings us to the end. I really appreciate, I know we had a lot on the agenda today. So to get through in about 3 hours, I think is actually pretty decent, considering what we tackled today. So I want to thank everyone and their attention and their participation today. And at this point, I want to make a motion for us to go into executive session, which means, most of us have to leave. I'm actually going to step out here too. While we do that, can I get a motion to
I'll make a
go
motion
into
to go
executive
into
session?
Executive session.
Do you have a topic? I don't do nothing. Okay.
Union negotiations.
Okay. Yeah.
We got, we have to go over just one thing.
I just need to use that.
12:30.
Yeah. I don't mean leave. No, I'll close the door. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
All
So we
right.
have
So we got a motion and a second.
Second,
All in favor. All right.
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'll
Do
close
what
the
you do.
door.
Right, okay, yeah. We just want to go over that one thing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna run down the hall.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thanks, Lord.